stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Why don't you go ahead and take a seat? I will do our invocation this evening. Our invocation tonight is a little bit out of the ordinary because it will be a Hindu blessing. Several months ago, I was asked by a gentleman who's the president of the Universal Society of Hinduism, Mr. Rajan Zed, if he could offer a Hindu invocation at our city council meeting. Mr. Zed has done this in the United States Senate, various state legislatures around the country, and in many different cities, including Las Vegas, Reno, Rapid City, just to mention a few. I told Mr. Zed that we couldn't grant his request because our invocations are only given by members of the city council. However, Mr. Zed was extremely gracious and understanding, and so I asked him if it would be appropriate for a council member, even if he or she were not Hindu and didn't share Mr. Zed's religious beliefs, to read something for him, since some Billings residents are Hindu, and we want to recognize that this is their city too. In fact, Billings is by far the most ethnically diverse and hence probably religiously diverse city in Montana, which is one of our many strengths. Mr. Zed said that would be appropriate and asked that I be the one to read the invocation on his behalf, even though he understood that my own beliefs as an evangelical Christian differ from some of the tenets of Hinduism. He also specifically asked that I at least try to recite the blessing in the ancient Sanskrit language. I hear chuckling, which goes back almost 5,000 years, and for Hindus is considered a holy language. So I'm sure I'll make a complete mess of it, and therefore I need to apologize in advance, but here goes. There are 4 stanzas, first in Sanskrit and then the English translation. Om Bahur Bahuva Sava Tat Savatur Varam Yam Bahargo Devasya Dahim Ahi Dio Yo Na Prako Dayat. We meditate on the transcendental glory of the deity supreme who is inside the heart of the earth, inside the life of the sky, and inside the soul of the heaven. May he stimulate and illuminate our minds. Asato ma sad gayama, tamaso ma yotir gayama, merit your mamar tam gayama. Lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from the darkness to the light, lead us from death to immortality. Tasmadas aka, sata tam karyam karma samakara, asakto hayam karan karma paramap noti purusa. Karma naive hai samsid dehimsta hita jana kadaya loka sanja hami vapi. Sama sayan karut mar hasi. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world. By devotion to selflessness, one attains the supreme goal of life. Do your work with the welfare of others always in mind. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace be unto all. So thank you for your patience, and again, I hope that you'll forgive my absolutely terrible, but probably humorous Sanskrit skills. With that, then, we will move on to the roll call. Do we have Denise or Tony with us? Would you please, Tony, please call the roll.
Councilmember Shaw. Here. Yakowicz.
Present.
Neese.
Here.
Ewalt.
Here.
Joy. Present. Chariki.
I'm here.
Purinton.
Present.
Ronning.
Here.
Boyette.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Mayor Cole.
Here. The minutes from our May 24th meeting are pending, so we will approve those at the next business meeting. Council courtesies. I'll just start us by, and I may be stealing the thunder from some in the Heights. I apologize if I am, but the Oasis Water Park is doing the opening of the new Harmony Park this Saturday, the 19th, June 19th, from 10 till in the morning until noon. There'll be food trucks, basketball, lawn games. Encourage everybody to get out there. As many here will remember, this is the piece of parkland that the City Council agreed to lease to the Better Billings Foundation for a nominal sum, with the understanding that the Better Billings Foundation would pay for the development and operation and maintenance of the park. That happened just this winter, and they have followed through already on that commitment. And so get up there and help them celebrate. It looks great. Other council courtesies, go ahead and raise your hand. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I just wanted to express again my appreciation for this being Flag Day. And since we have men that serve under the banner of this flag, and for all the men and women that serve under the banner of this symbol of freedom and liberties. So thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Councilmember Yakowicz for organizing the cleanup this past Saturday, and to Councilwoman Denise Joy and Councilman Frank Ewalt for pitching in, and all of the volunteers that pitched in and helped clean the interstate from, I think it was 27th Street to King Avenue. Is that correct? I think they got 30 bags of trash that they picked up and cleaned up, so thank you to all of them. And then I also wanted to acknowledge that I had the opportunity to meet with the YWCA, and I think they've extended the opportunity to all of council and some of city administration, and acknowledge the amazing work that they're doing in providing shelter to women and families that have been victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. And they're shovel ready for their third shelter building, and they're just doing phenomenal work in our community, and oftentimes get little recognition for the tremendous work they're doing. So I just wanted to give them a shout out and say thank you.
Thank you very much. Other council courtesies? Seeing none, we'll move on to our proclamations. We do have one, the Montana Football Hall of Fame Day. The National Gun Violence Awareness Day was June 4th. I did issue a proclamation, but since that day has passed, we won't read it here. But if anybody would like to see it, please contact me or Winnette in City Administration. We'll get you a copy. But for Montana Football Hall of Fame Day, the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas nearly 150 student athletes from Montana high schools play collegiate football every year, and whereas 270 Montana collegiate athletes have gone on to play professional football since 1926, and whereas Montana has more student athletes per capita than any other state that go on to play football in the NFL or Canadian Football League, and whereas these NFL, CFL veterans have not had their achievements noted or archived for future generations of Montanans, and whereas these athletes have valuable insights and stories to tell, and whereas former Eastern Montana College, EMC, football student athletes formed the Big Huddle, an organization providing a forum for these professional athletes to tell their stories and share experiences. And whereas the Big Huddle organization has grown to be the current Montana Pro Football Hall of Fame, and wishes for our city, county, and the state of Montana to recognize the significance of these achievements, now therefore I, William Cole, Mayor of the City of Billings, do hereby proclaim the last Saturday of each June as Montana Football Hall of Fame Day, and encourage residents to recognize the positive impact that our Montana Pro Football athletes continue to have on our universities and our communities, and to thank them for giving back to their communities. I was not one of those people who played professional football, in case you were wondering whether I was going to be honored in that way. Yeah, wasn't close. As a matter of fact, wasn't even close. Council reports. So, Council, any reports from organizations that you serve on behalf of the city that you want to update the rest of the council or the community on? Councilmember Joy.
Yes. The CBD, Community Development Board, met this last week, and I'd just like to say they're doing a great job. They've done a survey. They've come up with the necessary background in order to offer grants. So they have grants available for qualifying nonprofits that might be interested. So that's an opportunity for nonprofits to take advantage of that grant money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other council reports? Don't see any, so we'll move on to the administrator report. Just before I turn it over to Chris Kukulski, I'll just kind of remind council where we're at this evening. Because we don't have any amplification in this room, it's very important that anybody speaking keep their voice up, project toward the microphone there in the center, the big white box. I had a report earlier this evening that some parts of the room are very sensitive, so be careful what you say, and others are less sensitive, including back in that back row for the city council. So if you're in that back row, please speak up to help people hear. And also in the way of a schedule, we've got item number 5, the discussion on the public safety mill levy, which we expect to be a significant discussion tonight. That's item number 5. We've got 4 items before that, which I think we'll be able to proceed fairly quickly through. In a perfect world, we'd maybe spend 15 minutes per item, and that might put us to the public safety mill levy as early as an hour or a little bit beyond, somewhere between 6:30, 6:45, with the hope we could make significant progress on that before taking a break around 7:30. We'll see, but that's the goal. With that, Chris Kukulski, our city administrator. Chris.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, so thank you. So in light of recognizing the conversation with public safety, I did bump our legislative update, so it wasn't on the agenda, but just know that Amy and Greg are ready to give us our kind of wrap up of the legislative session and what will be happening in the interim, but we'll be a few weeks out on that. They were ready to go tonight, but I asked that we focus tonight on public safety. So second item there, the Billings Metropolitan Planning Organization is hosting a public open house to discuss the Billings Bypass Corridor study with interested members of the public. If you can't make that open house, I'll give the date and time of that here in just a second. If you can't make that, the same content and opportunities to participate are also available at the study website, which is www.billingsbypasscorridor.com. I have a mouthful, I'll say that again if anyone's listening out there, billingsbypasscorridor.com. The meeting will be June 17th, 2021 from 4:30 to 6 p.m. The open house will be held at Independent School Cafeteria. So Independent School Cafeteria, 2907 Roundup Road, June 17th from 4:30 to 6 if anybody can attend that in person, or go to billingsbypasscorridor.com. We've all been anxious, I think, in some part driven by the sound system here. Remember, this room was being designed and set up pre-pandemic so that we could televise live here with community meetings and events, not necessarily council meetings themselves. So we've been very much wanting to get back to City Hall, but last time we talked about that with you, council. Ideally, we all wanted to have a smooth transition where video conferencing could run smoothly between here and then the move to City Hall. Honestly, I'm worried about that timeline. Like much equipment from suppliers at this time, I'm told what's needed to make that happen at City Hall is on back order, and I don't know when it's going to be here. So what I'd ask you to consider, don't have to answer it now, but I think we should make a decision, and I'm tempted, frankly, because of sound. I do hear some complaints about sound on Zoom without amplifying each of you. Some of you are easily heard, others are not. We get back to City Hall, you'll all be amplified because you'll have mics in front of you, but we probably would have a gap between when we would be back up and running on video conferencing for consultants, for the public to participate. But if you'd please kind of give me your feedback whether that gap is okay or you want to stay here. Why am I kind of pushing that? The amplification back at City Hall And there's a lot more personnel resources, candidly, that go into having this meeting at this location. So if you'll think about that and get back to me on that. Some conversations as we're getting close to July 1. It's going to be here before we know it. There have been numerous meetings with the Teamsters on bargaining their contract. Winnett will be reaching out to you to set up small group meetings to kind of get you up to speed on where those discussions have been going. We thought maybe we'd have some conclusionary news for you tonight. We do not have that. We're continuing that dialogue. So that's ongoing. Also, the fire department contract is a wage opener only. We've not met. There have been several discussions about meeting and requests to meet, but they have not held a meeting as of yet to talk about that wage opener component. And then the media reported on a request kind of related to fire relative to an appeal that some employees are making in the airport to be included in the firefighters' retirement system. So our administrative team was in front of the PERS board, the state retirement board, last week on that appeal issue. If you want more details there, be happy to get into those in conversation. And last but certainly last contract issue, you may recall the police officers' contract. They actually did a 6-month extension to their contract during the middle of the legislative session to run through January 1st. So that one, we haven't started those negotiations yet. Those will start probably early fall. Those are all of my updates. Be happy to answer any questions if you have them, Mayor and Council.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris just on those items? Okay, we'll move on then to public comment on non-public hearing items. This evening, that's just item number 1, our consent agenda. That's item number 1A through J. Everything else is a public hearing. So if there's a member of the public who'd like to comment on items 2 through 6, wait, because there will be a public hearing and an opportunity later on those items. Now is item number 1. If you're here, just please come to the podium. You'll have 3 minutes. We'll ask you to give us your name and address. If you're watching and would like to participate on Zoom, you need to tell Tony to take you off mute and just raise your hand. Go to the feature at the bottom of your screen and click on that raise hand feature. We'll ask people here in the library to go first. So is there anybody in the library who would like to comment on anything on item number 1, our consent agenda? If so, please come to the podium. Is there any public comment on item number 1? Any public comment on item number 1? I'm not seeing any here in the library. Tony, do we have anybody who's raised their hand on Zoom for item number 1? Again, if you're watching by Zoom and would like to comment, use that raise hand feature.
I am not seeing any raised hands.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. So we will close the public comment period on item number 1. Move ahead. Is there a motion, or I'm sorry, first separations. Are there any items on item number 1 that you'd like to have a separate discussion to vote on? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be abstaining for 1J1. My employer is a recipient for payment for their outstanding services offered.
Morrison Merrily, thank you very much. All right, any other separations? Councilmember Neese?
I make a motion to approve item number 1 with Councilmember Brown abstaining from 1J1.
Okay, there's a motion for approval of item number 1, all of the separated items, or the non-separated items. Second by Councilmember Joy. So that's the motion before you. Council, any discussion, including questions for staff? Councilmember Yakowicz.
Thank you, Honor Council. Just on number D, consultant agreement with Tool Design to complete Safe Routes to School study update. I'm all for that. I think we'll continue to do our work on that. I just wanted to throw out, and I think Riverstone Health and many others who are working on this project since they presented last time, I'm just wondering, just throwing it out, I know that the contract in Exhibit A says about collective geographically, kind of the concept of where kids walk. But will they look into other nuances like speed? I'm talking to neighbors, and they often will physically take their kids to school, and I ask them why. They feel it's not just safe maybe because of sidewalks, but sections where there's a lot of speed, people driving through stop signs, or other nuances that are cause them not to be safe. So whoever's in charge of the contract, I just would like to potentially have them not only look at the sidewalk itself, but ask the question, why are parents reluctant to let their kids walk a mile to school? When Sean was his age, he'd walk 20 miles to school.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Barefoot in the snow. Okay, and I don't know if there's somebody from staff, and we also had an email that asked the question of why it was limited to safe routes around elementary schools and not middle schools, or presumably maybe high schools, but middle schools in particular. Is there anybody, do we know, that is on board from staff that could comment on that for us?
Yes, we
Wyatt?
just have.
There she is.
Is it Elise?
Yeah.
Elise, okay.
Hi.
Elise, it's all yours.
I'm happy to let Wyeth comment as well, but thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, Councilmember Yakowicz, that's a great idea. Part of the study is going to include a survey of parents and the schools and things like that. So that's definitely something we can ask them about. We know that the reasons why people don't walk or bike to school aren't just limited to those factors or to the engineering design factors. They also might be there's a neighbor with a really scary dog on the way to school, or there's a property they're afraid to walk by, or something like that. So we will definitely get to those issues. And then would you like to address the middle school thing, or?
That'd be great if you could.
Okay. Yeah, so we had a question about why we were just including the elementary schools in the Billings Public School District. The answer to that is that we are doing a study update to the 2010-2011 study that was done through Public Works. They had a consultant as well. But when we were looking at this with our budget, that was pretty much what our budget would allow for, and we figured that those schools have a lot of similarities in that elementary schools are generally neighborhood schools, so the traffic patterns of kids walking and biking to school are going to be very similar. When you start talking about middle schools or public or private schools or county schools, that gets a little different because you have kids coming from a further distance, and so you need to do some different analysis and things like that. So we were planning to follow up with another study to include those other schools in that, and then also because we started with this study from 2010-2011, we have baseline data from that, and so that's kind of a good place to start. And we don't have any baseline for the other schools, so that's kind of how we arrived at that scope of work.
Thank you very much. I saw some other hands, council members. Ewell, Purington, Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. That 2010-2011 study, did they rank by priority different sidewalks? Have all the sidewalks that they recommended been put in place from that study?
So with the 2010-2011 study, they ranked projects by priority by school, but they did not rank them across the whole city. And that's part of what we wanted to see in this, is that, it's hard for me as a staff member to go into that plan. And if, say, for instance, a grant should come up for a safe routes to school issue, it's hard for me to go into that plan and say, okay, this is the top priority that we should try to fund, because they're just ranked by school, so it doesn't give me a good ranking in between schools. So that's something we're looking at. And then also the school district redistricted between 2010 and now. So now kids who live in the same address would be going to different schools, and so that's part of the reason we were updating the study.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Purington?
Thank you. And Elise, thank you. I had addressed some of these concerns, the same ones that have been brought up. But I guess my, just continuing on in that conversation, when you look at that 2010 study, even though they're redistricting, I don't know when they started redistricting, but was anything actually done from that study? Were there safe routes that were actually put into place due to that?
Councilmember Purington, there definitely were. I don't have those exact things in front of me, but our Public Works Department certainly knows them and has been working off of them. So yes, the redistricting happened, I want to say in 2017. Don't hold me exactly to that year, but I think it was about then. So
follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So whenever you say that redistricting was, or whenever they do this study, it's going to be within a half-mile radius of the school. So even with redistricting, that still doesn't change the dynamics of that half-mile radius, that the kids would be going to a different school and that they would be within a half-mile radius of their new school. So I think my whole intent is, if there is a study that has been in place, there was money that was paid for the study, how much was actually used to produce something tangible from the study? And now, this is almost a $90,000 project. The city will be putting in $36,000. So, I'm just trying to get our money spent rather than sitting on a shelf someplace and go, oh, we'll take care of that later. So, I would hope that there are plans in place, monies in place that will be working towards getting some of these routes taken care of.
Okay, that's certainly be an important part of this update. Councilmember Boyette and Chris Kukulski?
Yes, sir.
You'd think I would have gotten that name figured out after 2 or 3 years, but no.
I'd like to talk about number A1, the boards and commissions. Over the last many years, I've served on many, many city and county boards and commissions. They're interesting. Some of them are fun. Some of them are very difficult. But if the public needs to participate, I'm giving a challenge to the people of Billings. Please, if you're interested at all in the city of Billings and want to know what's going on, apply for one of these boards. They're a lot of fun, and you'll know a lot more about the city of Billings. They're on our webpage. They're easy to apply for, and the mayor appoints you. So he's a friendly person. He'll do it and help you out.
Absolutely. Call anytime for information. Chris Kukulski.
So Mayor and Councilmember Purington, just want to assure you, I was looking for the number. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue, but each year we're spending 6 figures on sidewalk ordering in projects. And certainly part of what Public Works does in targeting where is use these various plans to guide locations. So the fact that we're looking to update it, it has not been sitting on the shelf just collecting dust. It is something that Public Works does use and brings to you ultimately what the sidewalk projects will be for each year. I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 a year in sidewalk work that we do, and this year we added some to that. Our actual limitation, I think, has become, if I recall, contractor availability. I think Debbie mentioned last we maybe peak out about $1 million a year is about what we can get flat concrete work done in town between all the contractors and concrete availability.
I think that was part of my point, Chris, is that surely out of those 22 elementary schools over the past 10 years, we have done something. So why would we go back and include them into an updated study when it's probably not going to change that much? And we could have put in 1 or 2 of the middle schools, or, mix it up a little bit.
Councilmember Brown and Councilmember Wall.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, how often do we do these studies or update these studies? And the reason I ask is there were some very good points brought up, for elementary versus middle schools, where most of the incidents are with middle schoolers. And, that's a big deal. Not that we want to ignore elementary by any means. But I'm wondering that it was mentioned earlier that maybe the middle schools would be subject of another study later on. Do you know how long that might be?
I don't. I'm going to need to rely on Wyatt or somebody who has some history here in Billings. Sounds like our staff there, Elise, as to, I'm assuming the years that they're giving us are the last few updates that's happened. But Elise, anything you'd add to that as far as how many of these we've done or how often we do them?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. So for this one, we were thinking we would do the second study possibly in fiscal year 22 or 23. There are certain studies that we have to update on a schedule, like our long-range transportation plan are updated on a schedule. Everything else is kind of as we see the need. And with the redistricting, we saw the need. There was also a lot of discussion earlier in the year about funding for safe routes to school. So we thought this would be a very timely study for that to help direct funding and give people a very timely way to provide input on how that funding would be spent.
So we don't know when we might do another one.
From a time frame, I heard some of this is my first metropolitan planning area. Part of what I heard Elise say is the federal government, who funds most of that, has some timetables on requiring updates, and then other ones are more up to our timeline. When it comes to these sidewalks, are they guided by the Fed's timelines, or there really are localized timelines?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Yes, it's completely up to us. We receive a certain amount of federal funding every year to do transportation studies. The funding can only be applied to these transportation studies, not other types of like land use planning, that type of thing. So whenever we have funding available and that pot of money that we get from the federal government, we're able to do it on our own timeline.
Thank you, Mayor. And one follow-up.
Councilor Brown?
Did we choose the elementary schools simply because of the cost of the study? Or is that the main focus or the main need?
Councilmember Brown, Mayor, what I understood is that the previous ones had them as the baseline, and this being an update, they stuck to that. But I am curious as to, is it a whole new study that has to be done to meet the federal requirements to add junior high?
Okay.
Or not. If it can be, I would suggest we have that conversation and see what that looks like to bring back to you.
Perfect.
But clearly the baseline information, what I'm hearing that we had from 11 and then 17 was focused on elementary. We hear you that junior high is just as critical as elementary when it comes to walkability.
Great, thank you.
Okay, back to Councilmember Gewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any chance that we could have this brought back and check in to see how much more it would cost to incorporate the middle schools also in this study? Before we vote on it? Is that,
Sure. Our planning director, Wyatt, can you give us an idea? How much more are we talking?
Councilmember Ewald and Mayor and Council, I don't know how much more we're talking. I guess the bigger challenge with this is the budget that was approved in the Unified Planning Work Program, which this council, the planning board, the county commissioners, and then MDT and Federal Highways signed off on in the federal fiscal year we're in right now. We're in that budget realm. So it's actually, what this is doing tonight is approving the contract for that study that was approved in our work program. So we would have a challenge there going back and having to try to amend the entire work program and change that versus being able to come back and say, as Elise pointed out, we want to do a focus study on the middle schools or something like that in the future. And really, I think just to add to that on the middle schools, it's really important. I mean, as Elise said, those are the students that go to those schools come from a much broader area in each area of town. It's different than the elementary, so there is a fairly different analysis and kind of look about that in terms of both, walking, biking, how that circulation works on a middle school versus an elementary. So that there would just be some big differences there. But there's nothing that says we can't, come back with an analysis that would look at something like that.
Is that a time-consuming process to do a 30,000-foot flyover of that issue and report back?
No, I think we could take a big picture look and try and get a sense of that, and I would, visit with our transportation staff and see if we could provide more information there.
We don't have the authority to tell you anything, Wyeth, but I think the city administrator is getting the sense that that'd be an interesting question. So, you guys can talk about it. Okay, any other discussion on the motion for approval of the non-separated items of the consent agenda? Councilmember Neese.
Before we go vote, I just want to voice my support for going out and getting a study for the schools. I think we've got to get that done. I don't know how soon we can do it, but I think that needs to be done so we can take a look at it. At least if it's constrained by other communities, hopefully we have it next year. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. After listening to all this stuff, I would like to separate D for a special vote and ask staff to come back. We could delay this one business session or two business sessions. I don't think it would make that much difference. And see if it's possible to work in the middle schools, because we got a lot of places to go. We got some bad transportation around some of the middle schools too. So
Okay, so
separate that for a special vote, please.
okay, thank you. So we've kind of passed the time where you can just unilaterally separate, just because we have a motion to approve the non-separated items. So we'll treat this as a motion to amend that underlying motion. We'll have a vote on whether to separate that. So that's the motion. Is there a second for that amendment to the motion? Councilmember Purington makes the second. So discussion now on the proposed amendment to pull out item number 1D. You heard the discussion. Councilmember Neese, discussion on that proposed amendment.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify from Wyeth, if you don't mind. If I understand correctly, the funds that are available, we're not going to be able to get more funds, or even if we could do middle school, unless the city put in funds themselves. So, from wherever these funds are coming from, these funds are coming from the federal funds. It's got to go through. It's got to go through all the committees. So the delay. How long a delay are we talking about as far as trying to get this approved to get the middle schools in this study?
Councilmember Neese and Mayor and Council, the challenge here is that we're in the middle of the federal work program, like I said, that was approved by all the entities of the MPO, the county, the city, the planning board, and then MDT and federal highways all sign off on that. That starts every October 1st and goes to September 30th each year. So we're about midpoint. To look at modifying it as you're describing, we would be looking at having to amend that work program, then try and get approval through all the entities and also MDT and federal highways to see if they would make that adjustment in this this year to then change the scope and change what the project was originally estimated to be. So it's got some challenges. We're doing there's this type of a change because of the change to the budget, and the scope would be we'd have to run it through that process. So that's why I guess we're recommending, totally understanding this discussion of the middle schools, that we look at that as a separate effort when we can program it into a work program, in a future year. Because then from the very beginning, everybody understands what's going on. We also would be able to solicit some more input from some of those other stakeholders to including the school district to do that.
Quick follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
If the council were to deny this now and then in the future, would those funds be available and more funds available to actually pay for a bigger study to conclude the middle schools?
Councilmember Denise and Mayor and Council, our experience with, and it's only happened one other time that I'm aware of, which was the Fifth Avenue corridor study. It was approved in our work program, and then the council didn't approve the contract when it came. We got a lot of questions and not understanding from Federal Highways and MDT about why an approved project in the work program then suddenly wasn't happening because of the contract. And so I guess I would advise us not to do that, because that then they start to ask questions about why are we, we're allocating these funds through your program and now you're not using them, or you're saying you're not going to use them now, and then we have to go back and kind of have that discussion. So there's some things about that I guess I wouldn't advise us to do.
So do they spend that money that we don't use then on some other projects?
Potentially, what'll happen is it gets reprogrammed. I mean, I'm not going to say that we lose it all. It's just that it gets reevaluated and then we come back the next time.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we pretty well understand we should move to a vote, but Councilor, you want something quick?
Yeah, I got a question for Wyatt. So if this doesn't pass and we decide to vote it and it gets voted in, is it going to be cheaper to have somebody come back and do all the middle school separately? Or if we take a chance, we could probably get it done cheaper if we combine them and get it all done in one shot? You got them working on it. So which would be the cheaper route to go? That's what I'm looking at, is if they're working on it already and they're going to be here, it's probably going to be a little cheaper to get it done. The whole kit and caboodle in this doing the elementary schools.
Councilmember Ewald, Mayor and Council, I don't know whether it would be necessarily cheaper or how that would work, or whether this consultant team, again, we are recommending it based on doing this analysis. So I think if we're looking at a different scope and everything, I wouldn't say that I know for sure what that would look like without us, going through that whole process and seeing if that's the right fit or not.
Okay, Councilmember Treaky.
When is the federal cycle over?
Councilmember Treaky and Mayor and Council, we're the end of September is the current federal fiscal year we're in, and then we start a new one October 1. We're going to be bringing like we do normally the work program proposals for this next cycle later on this summer.
So the fiscal year, I mean, it would be pretty hard to actually go through the bureaucratic process and get it done and reprogram for this.
Councilmember Treaky, Mayor and Council, yeah, I mean, we're getting close to where by the time we did all that, we would be getting close to the end of this cycle.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Councilor Purington?
Well, one thing that, as I look back on the memo that we have, I didn't realize why that it went through all of that process, even though it kind of says it right there. I didn't realize that's what it was. And it was an RFP, so to me, you'd almost have to send out a new RFP to do the whole thing. So I think at this point, I'm going to withdraw my second and just go ahead and let it proceed. Is there any assurance that you'll get those funds next year? I think Elise was saying in 23 or 24, or no, it was 22 and 23, that she was saying that those funds might become available for the middle school.
Councilmember Purington and Mayor and Council, basically what we would be wanting to do if we were wanting to include another analysis like for the middle schools or bringing in other schools would be to propose that as part of our either the next work program for 2022 or 2023, and call that out so that that's a proposal, because basically what happens is we bring those proposals, all the different projects forward, the council, the commissioners, and the local entities, the planning board, and then MDT, the district, makes a recommendation of approval for that program, and then MDT and Federal Highways approves it. So if we bring it up as one of those projects, then that's where it gets put into that queue of, okay, looking at what's being proposed, is there funding that can be allocated? So it's not that we would lose, I mean, we can propose it for a future work program regardless. We just have to come back with that as a specific project.
Okay, thank you. At this point, there isn't a second on the motion. Is there a second for the motion? Motion again is to amend the underlying motion to delay this until staff comes back with a proposal to on the middle school option. Is there a second? I'm not seeing a second, so the proposed amendment dies for lack of a second. We're back to the original motion, which is for approval of the non-separated items, which is everything other than 1J1 that Councilmember Brown will recuse himself on. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of approval of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor of the motion are all members of the City Council. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. With the exception of Councilmember Brown, who did not vote on item, no, he did vote because we'd recused. So now, item 1J1, is there a motion? Councilmember Neese.
Make a motion, we approve item 1J1 with Councilmember Brown abstaining.
Second by Councilmember Boyette. Discussion on the motion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are all members, Councilmember Purington, including Councilmember Purington, all members of the City Council with the exception of Councilmember Brown, who abstained. Motion passes. Thank you very much. That concludes item number 1. Brings us then to item number 2. I'm going to ask Councilmember and Deputy Mayor Mike Yakowicz to take over the gavel on this item. I'm recusing myself for the reasons I stated before. I was involved with the drafting of this document years ago and still have, I guess, a technical relationship with the applicant. So, Councilmember Yakowicz.
Thank you for informing me. Thank
Hey,
you,
it was in the email.
I'd like to turn this over first to Mr. Kukulski for any further reference.
For a second reading, I don't think we have any kind of staff report that we need to give. Nothing's changed between first reading and second reading, but part of RICO does have us with a second public hearing. So with that, Wyatt, is there something we want to present?
Excuse me, I should ask Denise if she would like to read item number 2.
Thank you.
It's Tony. Item number 2, public hearing and second final reading ordinance for zone change 991. A zone change to amend parts of the Lenhart Square Plan Development Agreement, generally located at King Avenue West and 44th Street West. Lenhart Square Master Association, Alan R. Lenhart, owner, Sanderson Stewart, Rick Luthold, PE agent. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 criteria. Action, approval, or disapproval of the Zoning Commission recommendation.
All right, Mr. Kukulski.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor and Council. Nicole does have a brief presentation for you related to this second reading, this second public hearing. So I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. Kukulski, Mayor and Council. Tony, you will have to enable screen sharing for me. Maybe. Okay, well, until Tony enables the screen sharing, I won't give you a presentation. But Project RICO did update our zoning change process to require a public hearing for both the first reading and the second reading of all zone changes. So the public hearing for the second reading is really to affirm your first reading vote and to take any additional public comments either from the applicant or from the public. So that's the gist of it. Oh, she's enabled screen sharing. So we'll do a short presentation just to remind you. This is to update the underlying zone districts, to update the average density calculations and amend the heights in the planned development zone. Planned development zones are specialized zoning districts that only apply to the property, to the subject property. They can't be applied to any other property. The council did vote in the affirmative on May 24th on first reading to approve the zone change and did adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission at that date and time. They found that it does meet the growth policy in the West Billings Neighborhood Plan, that the increase in density will be minor across the entire 114-acre parcel, but will keep the housing choices economically attainable for those who are looking for housing in Billings. Adjacent uses and zoning will be compatible, and it will increase the housing choices in this neighborhood. Here is the zoning map of the area. The kind of light blue, pale blue here is the planned development zoning color on our zoning map. It is adjacent to the city limits, so there are agricultural zonings to the north and west, some rural residential zoning to the west as well, but it is across the street from some very dense urban development south of King Avenue West, as well as some new development happening in St. V's healthcare plan development to the east. So kind of the 5 highlights are to eliminate the residential multifamily fourplex zone district and replace the 2 parcels that are in that zoning into the multifamily restricted zone district, change the building height measurements from numerical height limits to number of stories in a building, increase the maximum average dwelling density from 20 to 21 in that multifamily restricted zone, and from 20 to 35 in the mixed-use zone. There'd be minor wording changes throughout the document to update it. Here's the original master plan for Lenhart Square. The yellow here on this graphic represents the MF4 zone that will be eliminated and then replaced by the multifamily restricted zone. The mixed-use zone is staying in the same location on the map, and that's along the frontage of King Avenue West. And here's an aerial of the property showing the existing development in the area. And then, of course, the review criteria are summarized on this screen, and the findings for those review criteria are in your staff report. And that is my presentation. Be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Council, would you like to ask any questions to Nicole? All right, I'd like to give the agent an opportunity if he wanted to say anything at this time. Mr. Luthol.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Yakowicz. Again, serving as agent for the Lenhart family, the founders on Lenhart Square. And Nicole has provided a very good presentation. We went through this at the previous meeting. Again, we've had zoning commission. We've had the previous city council public hearing, votes in unanimous favor of carrying this forward. I would ask that the council reaffirm that here on second reading this evening and vote in favor of carrying these minor changes forward for this document. It's 13 years old and has a few things that need to be updated. I would be happy to answer any questions the council might have, but like I say, we went through pretty much everything last go around, and I have not heard of anything new that would need to be addressed here this evening. Thank you very much, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Yakowicz, and council members.
Thank you, Mr. Luthol. Council, do you have any questions for the agent? I see no questions, so we'll turn now to public comment. Are there anyone in this room who would like to give public comment on item number 2? Please introduce yourself and your address, please.
Jan Reberg, 4401 Highway 3, Billings. Again, to just reiterate what Rick says, I'm just here if something comes up or if you have any questions. I think it was fairly thoroughly discussed the last time, and we'd ask you to reaffirm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Under 3 minutes.
Yes, very good. Anyone else in the room would like to give public comment? I see none. Denise, are there any people online who would like to give public comment?
I do have someone who would like to talk.
Thank you, Tony.
Hello, you have reached the public comment period for tonight's City Council meeting. You will have 3 minutes in which to give your comment. May I have your name and address, please? Sharon, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, may I have your name and address, please?
My name Avenue West.
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you start over?
My name is Sharon Welch. I live at 4625 King Avenue West.
Okay, go ahead.
They supposedly had a neighborhood meeting, and I was never notified of it. I had no clue that this was even coming up, and I'm not very happy with this. We have a lot of apartment buildings out here now that are not even beginning to be full, and I just don't see any reason for this type of thing to even come up. We're too early. There's no need.
Okay, is that all you had to say this evening?
It is. It'd be nice if these things were a little bit more, how do you put it? If people were notified, there were people that objected to it last time and wanted to know about what that was going to do to the crime. There's no way King Avenue West can support this kind of building out here. As it is, we can't get out of our driveway sometimes for over 5 minutes because of the traffic. My car was just T-boned on King Avenue and 64th West, and guess what? We were in the right-of-way. And that's going to continue to be a problem, no matter how you look at it. You've got these developers saying, oh, people are going to walk across the street and use the conservation park. You can't walk across King Avenue now. How are you going to do that? They aren't. It's kind of pointless. It's my comment. Thank you for listening. I just thoroughly think this is just rubber stamping whatever developers want to do in this town.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I do not have any other raised hands that would like to comment.
Okay, thank you, Tony. All right. I'd like to close public comment at this time and entertain a motion. I see Mr. Boyette, Councilperson Boyette.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Having conducted 2 public hearings, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the second reading of the Zone Change 991 and adopt the findings of the 10 criteria as approved by the City Council on the first reading of May 24th, 2021.
All right, and Mr. Brown makes a second. Thank you. Any other comment by council? I see none. Okay, all in favor of this agenda item number 2, raise your hand. Okay, I see all council except our mayor, who has abstained from this ruling, and no opposition. This is passed. Thank you. Your Honor, I will turn the gavel back to you and thank you for recusing yourself, even though you didn't have to.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Yakovich. Next item up is item number 3. Tony, would you read item number 3?
Item number 3, public hearing and resolution creating SID 1418 Holiday Avenue improvements. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Debbie Melling is our presenter this evening on this SID. Debbie.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yes, we've got 2 SIDs tonight. This is the first of them. I think holiday is the first one, right? Yes. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is a location map showing Holiday Avenue. Not everybody knows where it is, but it's just south of Midland Road, and it runs between Maloney and Songbird. Just a few minutes ago, when you approved consent, you approved the work order for Songbird Drive. So this project is actually connected to that project. So it's bounded by Songbird on one side, and then Holiday is actually constructed all the way over to where you see that green line. So it's a really small project, really short project. So as I said, it is combined with Songbird. Generally, we are improving Holiday Avenue. It's a high maintenance road right now. It's not terribly usable. And when we do Maloney in FY23, this gives the entire area a second way out. So as you know, most of you know, there's Josephine and Riverfront Crossing that are south of this area. So having a second access when Maloney's under construction will be really helpful for the neighborhoods. There are 2 property owners. There's actually 3 properties, but it's 2 different property owners. They're generally paying half of the SID each. There's very little city contribution on this because it is bounded on both sides by project or properties that front the project. So you can see the light blue on the north side and the pink on the south side. This just shows the section. It's got sidewalk, curb and gutter, and 44 feet back to back of asphalt. And then the blue line you see there is actually the storm infrastructure. We have a lot of problems on Holiday right now on the existing road. We have to pump the area, lots of stormwater problems. So this will help us take care of those issues that we're seeing right now. Total project cost is about $340,000. Like I said, there's 3 parcels, but just two property owners. The assessment amount is $250,000, and that will be split equally between the 2 property owners. They're basically paying the improvements in front of their property and the 44 feet back to back. The city is contributing just under $90,000, and the reason is because it's a 44-foot back-to-back street, and we don't require adjacent property owners to pay for the entire width under an SID. So we're paying for a portion of the asphalt, some curb and gutter where it goes around the corners that are not fronting, and then the storm infrastructure, which I showed you just a minute ago, the blue line there. So the assessment, as you can see, there's about just under $340 per foot. Again, it's about half. It is half and half for the properties. The schedule of the project: in May, you approved the resolution of intent on the consent agenda. Tonight is the resolution to create after the public hearing. We have received no protests on this project. The bid opening for construction would be mid-June, and we would plan to bring that to you on the June 28th agenda for award. We would start construction sometime in the next year. We made that flexible because the contractors are really having a hard time. There's a lot of work out there. They're having a hard time getting materials. We wanted to make this as flexible as we could to try to get good prices on the bid. So I don't have an exact start date or end date that we put in the contract, but it is to be completed by the middle of, end of spring next year. And the assessments would go on taxes after that point. So that is the project. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions for Debbie before we open up for public hearing? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, you said Songbird is getting redone also?
It is.
Is this going to be just like added to that contractor, or is it going to be a totally separate, different contractor that will be doing it, being it's tied into Songbird?
Councilmember Ewald, the project is actually being bid with both of them together. So the scope of the project is both projects, both streets.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Debbie? If not, we'll open up for public comment. First, anybody in the library here who'd like to comment on item number 3, please come to the podium. Ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address. And then we'll look to anybody online and ask them to use the raise hand feature online to tell us to unmute you. Anybody in the library here who would like to comment on item number 3, please come to the podium. Is there anybody who would like to comment on item number 3? This is a public hearing. I don't see anybody in the library. How about online? Tony, do we have anybody who's used the raised hand feature on Zoom?
I do not have anyone requesting to speak.
Okay, we don't have anybody requesting to comment, so we will close the public hearing on item number 3 and move it for discussion, motions, other questions. Councilmember Joy.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move we approve the resolution creating SID 1418 as recommended by staff.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese, I saw at the second. Okay, discussion on the motion. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Many constituents will be very happy to have this access paved. It's been an interest to the constituents and the people who live out in Songbird and in that area to have a way to get back out to Midland Road. And so this is a project that has been looked forward to for a very long time. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Any other discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, we'll proceed to a vote then. The motion is for approval consistent with the staff recommendation. All in favor, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are all members of the City Council. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That concludes item number 3. Tony, would you read item number 4?
Item number 4, public hearing and resolution creating SID 1411 Park Lane paving. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Debbie Melling.
Me again. This is going to look very familiar. I didn't get overly creative putting these together today, so oops. So Park Lane is another one that is, I'm not sure what happened there. Sorry, let me fix this really quickly. Park Lane is another one that is in conjunction with the project that you just approved on consent. It is next to Highwood. So on this screen, you can see that Park Lane runs east-west and Highwood is north-south just adjacent to it. So this project, like the other one, is kind of an add-on that we wanted to do while we were in the area, but it doesn't fall under a work order because it's not paved to date. So it's a gravel street, it needs to be done through an SID. So that's the location of it. This is a picture of Park Lane seen from Highwood. Again, Highwood is the one that we are doing under a work order. So we combine that. Again, this is part of our gravel street project where we're just trying to reduce the number of gravel streets in the city. 1, because it's better for our citizens, and 2, it really cuts down on our maintenance costs. The district is shown there. There are only 2 property owners, again, in this district. Park Lane itself is quite a bit longer, but everybody else adjacent to it is addressed off of other streets, either Rimrock Road or Highwood. So it's just the 2 property owners at the end. This is a picture of the general plan, and this is a very narrow street. We have 20 feet of right-of-way, and we intend to build it about 17 feet wide. It's really all we can get in there with the existing improvements. It also will include curb and gutter for storm drainage and some drive approaches. There won't be sidewalk on this due to lack of right-of-way, and it really doesn't serve a very large area, so this will be done with just curb and gutter. Total project cost is just over $110,000. 2 parcels in the district. The assessments will be $30,000. And again, we will do this as a per assessment, so it will be split, divided 50%. The benefit to both property owners is very similar because they both use the same portion of road to access their properties. So the assessed improvements are curb gutter, the street, and drive approaches that are adjacent to their homes. The city will be contributing for some of the asphalt for the non-addressed properties, the curb and gutter, and storm for the non-addressed properties. And the cost for each property is $15,000. Project schedule, very similar to the other one I showed you. The resolution of intent was the end of May. Tonight, after the public hearing, you have an opportunity to approve the creation. Bid opening will be tomorrow, and that will have a tentative award date of the 28th, depending on those bid results. We did the same thing with this project, giving it a flexible start and end date to try to encourage better bids, and we just required that it be completed by July of next year, and then the assessments would go on taxes after that. So I can answer any questions about that project.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, just real quick on this, the properties that are non-addressed and not assessed, are they going to have curb access? They're like drive approaches along there, or is it just going to be straight curbing?
So all of them but one do not. So one property does have access that is not being assessed for the project.
So they're going to get a drive. I'm sorry, follow.
Go ahead.
So the one property who's not being assessed, the city's going to provide them a driver approach at no cost.
Right.
Is that normal?
It is not normal, but we don't usually have an FID where very few people front it. Park Lane is a really unique street in that it basically is an alley for all intents and purposes, but there's those two properties right at the end. So yeah, we don't see this very often.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for staff before we go to a public comment period? Any other questions for staff? Ms. Sini, so we'll open up for public hearing on item number 4, Park Lane SID 1411. If there's anybody in the library here, please come forward to the podium. And if there's anybody online, go ahead and use your raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen on Zoom so that Tony knows to take you off mute. Is there anybody in the library who would like to comment on item number 4? Anybody in the library would like to comment on item number 4? Don't see anybody in the library. How about online? Again, use your raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then Tony will take you off mute. Tony, do you see anybody with their hand raised on item number 4?
I have not had anyone request to speak.
Okay, there's no public comment here or online, so we will close the public hearing on item number 4. Back to council for further questions or motion. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the resolution creating SID 1411 as recommended by staff.
Is there a second? Councilmember Ewald.
I didn't second.
Oh, I'm sorry. See, 2 fingers up for Councilmember Neese. Okay, motion's made and seconded. Discussion now on the motion. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. So Debbie, I think what I saw on your proposal there too is the city's paying for a good portion of the asphalt, even though it's only about 18 or 17 feet wide.
Sorry, there was some paper, something moving. I couldn't hear anything. The city's paying for some portion of asphalt.
Yeah, didn't it show that the city was paying for a good portion of that asphalt also? And it's not asphalt now, it's just gravel. And I thought gravel streets, the people had to pay for the asphalt. It kind of falls in the same line as a drive approach. That's always been assessed to the property owner.
Councilmember Ewald, our SID policy says that non-addressed properties, if they're residential, do not have to pay for the non-addressed side. So when these when Rimrock came through, these property owners had to pay for Rimrock. And the idea behind the SID policy is that residential properties don't have to pay for 2 sides. So they do front onto Rimrock, which is where they paid.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion or questions for staff? Any other discussion on the motion? Motion is for approval, consistent with the staff recommendation. Item number 4, we'll proceed to a vote if there is no other discussion. Don't see any, so all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are Council members Cole, Joy, Ronning, Yakowicz, Chiriki, Boyette, Purington, Brown, and Shaw. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition are Council members Ewald and Neese. Motion passes. Thank you very much. That concludes item number 4. Brings us then to item number 5. I'll just comment that we came close to the goal, Council. Thank you very much. Tony, would you read item number 5?
Item Item number 5, public hearing and first reading ordinance amending city charter by adding section 1.05.2, public safety mill levy. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a number of staff presenters this evening. Our city administrator, Chief St. John, our city attorney, planning director, fire chief, or future fire chief. So we'll jump right into it. Council, I would hope that we would get done with the presentation before we would normally take a break. By 7:30, we can assess then whether to take the break then or get into some questions and then take a break. So with that, Chris Kukulski.
Mayor and council, thank you. That's exactly what we'll target, and hopefully we'll get in a little under that. So I just want to take the time to back up for just a couple minutes. So Kevin's going to work slides for me here. You guys have heard me since I've, maybe about 6 months into this role, working together about these strategies to improve and move Billings forward. Tonight we're here to talk about public safety, which is unquestionably occupied most of the administrative kind of leadership time over the past few years. That's not to say it wasn't heavily worked on before I got here, as there were previous levies to these. So if we can move on. Really tonight we're going to talk about the strategies to improve Billings safety, talk about the challenges we face, and present to you what we see as solutions in that regard. So this is similar but a little different from what you saw about a year and a half ago. We still unfortunately do have a problem from my perspective and our citizens from their statistically valid survey that we did, that we do have a crime problem. And a year ago, that identified that violent crime rates were up about 100% over 12 years. Now we're at 200% over 10 years. So I do want to recognize certainly 2019, or 2020 in the pandemic were not good to us. I don't want to overstate those numbers, but it more than doubled in 2020. Now, it would be nice if 2021 and the end of the pandemic, which essentially for most of us, we've been here for a while in Billings generally, that if crime rates went back down to where they were in 2019, but that's not what we're seeing. 2021, the chief will show you, is continuing to kind of climb. So we got those issues there. And then on the fire department side, it really is a shift to deploying in a different fashion than we were before. Last time you saw this slide, it said we were taking too long to respond to calls. Now with the CPSM data, it's really telling us it's how we deploy and what resources we deploy to the specific types of calls that they recommend will be the major efficiency improvement in responding to calls for emergency services from our fire department. Center for Public Safety Management report is a significant part of the work we did during this past year. If you remember, we were in this room, it was January 16th. We were rolling out to you after 6-8 months of talking about the strategies. We were getting ready to roll out what would have been a full implementation of our strategies before we hit the pandemic. Part of the benefit was to have the Center for Public Safety Management come in and analyze our data so that we could then adjust our recommendations based on that good third-party review of our data in Billings. And there were 102 recommendations on the police side, 34 on the fire side, and it was just a week ago that we were here in depth talking about those fire recommendations. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we did have the opportunity to reach out to our citizens through the National Police Services Survey and hear from them as to what they're thinking. And they were saying, good news, generally, we've got a high level of trust and confidence in our local police department. That's the good news. The bad news, we recognize crime rates and crime issues need to be tackled. So next. So I'm going to hit this at a high level, and then each director is going to talk to you about their department and the implementation of their strategies to make Billings a safer community. Again, at the high level, we come in to this budget with the overwhelming majority of this $1.3 million imbalance really focused on making public safety investments this current year, not wanting to wait until next year. Got mental health and substance abuse component there with 2 mills, so that's an approximate. We've got the recommendations from the Center for Public Safety Management on the police side. Those were just shy of 20 FTEs. The chief and I, based on the kind of immediate crime data and issues we're dealing with, we've added 8 additional resources to that. Between both recommendations, almost split right down the middle, half non-sworn positions, half sworn positions. I expect, if we're fortunate enough to have you approve this and we get into the community having, 50, 75, 100 conversations with our citizens, I'm already being asked, what's the difference between the non-sworn and the sworn? And I'm going to tell you, it's really all about efficiency of delivering services, which I think helps our message, frankly, when you get into some of those details. The fire recommendations are all about the implementation of their side of that efficiency plan, most notably the medical response teams that handle peak time calls and the cost to implement there. And then we've, in summary, legal, court, code enforcement, all which basically get us to a little north of $7.1 million, $7.11 million. 34 mills, or just shy, don't want to sound too much like a salesman here, I don't know if it's 99.79, I've seen 2 different numbers, or is it $100.41. So rounding, we're talking about $100 for the median home in town, or just a little north of $8 a month. For some context, a year ago, want to continue to emphasize, right? We were a couple years in the making to get here to tonight. A year ago, we're talking about just shy of $300, but a number of things have changed since then. The public approved the repeal and replacement, so they've already bitten off just shy of $60 of that $300 that they approved last year. The federal government, through its grants, the CARES Act, and through the most recent, all of a sudden it's escaping me now, the acronym for ARPA, thank you. For ARPA planning, we've got cash now to take care of the facility need of the equation instead of indebting ourselves and asking the voters to approve bonds. All that leaves us at just a little north of $100 to implement that 7.1 million there. The last piece I would say is, if implementing turns out to be as effective as we believe it will be on the recommendations of both reports, this ask is significantly smaller in police resources and fire resources due to efficiencies that they have made recommendations to us on, and we are implementing. So next slide. So these just show you those in dollars. So you can see that median home where we were, a little over a year ago at 296, and where we stand today with much, much smaller imbalance thanks to our voters last year. Law enforcement, you kind of read down the list there to get that 141 cents. Next. Just about ready to turn it over to the police chief here. You've seen this slide before. These tie the FTEs, or the full-time equivalent individuals or personnel, to each of these areas wherever we're adding. Does not cover the things that don't have a cost to them. We're implementing those already. Next slide. Just want to remind ourselves in the next 2 slides here what our lanes are as a city. We provide code enforcement and law enforcement. It's squarely our responsibility as a local unit of government, as a city. We prosecute crimes and we provide victim services and advocacy and helping them. And we operate our municipal court. We are heavily dependent on partnerships for a significant part of the criminal justice system. So I'm going to talk about those here as we get into social services, prosecute felonies, and deal with incarceration. All of those are really relationships we have with other entities. So Yellowstone Substance Abuse Connect Coalition, a group that law enforcement and 80-some other entities have been involved in over the past several years, developing strategies to lower crime. If you read, if you go, they're just about ready to roll out what I've seen a sneak view of, a really clean, simple website of what Substance Abuse Connect work is. Their goal mirrors ours. Bottom line, their goal is to reduce crime in our community. And that's the same goal we have. And so utilizing those partnerships there, we're working with the Continuum of Care. That's more around the homelessness issue. They're a partner with us. Yellowstone County Attorney's Office is who prosecutes felonies. Our prosecutors are on the misdemeanor side. The Sheriff's Office obviously has a whole series of components, not the least of which is incarceration. We do not incarcerate as a city. It's a partnership with Yellowstone County. The state of Montana, I think these conversations have been beefed up quite a bit from a year ago. Conversations directly with the governor's office, with Department of Corrections, and the new director of the Department of Corrections to deal with individuals who are being released into our community, some of which who we think are getting exceptional services and help to not commit more crimes, others who are not seeming to get those kind of services, and how can we work that? We can't do that alone. That is a relationship with the state of Montana there. Similarly, the federal government, you'll hear the chief talk about, you've all heard, one of our major drivers of issues here is methamphetamine. The city of Billings can't tackle the methamphetamine issue in southeast Montana on its own. We have to rely, and we do rely, on our partnerships with the federal government in doing that work. And then now I'm going to turn it over to Chief St. John. Each department director is going to get more into kind of the stories and the specifics of what they're doing, will do, if you choose to make these investments that we believe will result in a safer Billings. After they're done, I've got just a couple slides to wrap it up, and we'll go from there. Chief.
Thank you, boss. Mayor, council, good evening. Good to see you in person. Although I'm sure it's not reciprocal, but you did have the kill button there, so you didn't have to look at this face. Before I get going into this, I want to just add a caveat here to make sure you understand. In the whole, probably 99% of what Mr. Kukulski just told you had to do with the police department, the crime, the criminal justice system that we're dealing with. And certainly we've got some issues that we need to deal with. Although, it was very, very heavy on the police side, understand we are inextricably linked to our partners in public safety here. Without fire, without our attorneys, without court, without code, none of us are going anywhere. And when people start saying public safety, it's like the entire focus is on the police department and crime-related problems. And we're up to the task, and we'll do what we need to do with whatever you and the citizens give us, but understand that we need the partners that are going to talk to you here when I get done. They're equally important. If they're not with us for whatever reason, then we got some serious problems. The strategies that you see up here, again, as Mr. Kukulski alluded to, these haven't changed from pre-COVID and even before that. We are aggressively working to get a handle on these 4 specific strategies. Again, not new to you. Our violent crime is certainly making headlines almost weekly. We need to get a handle on that. Once that gets out of control, it's tough to stop and get turned the other way. But we are making some headway on it. Downtown safety, we have spoken ad nauseum on that. Whether it's real, whether it's perceived, it's an issue with our citizens. We need to have a vibrant downtown to attract businesses, to attract the tourists, to attract the recreational that takes place down there. We need to do better on making people feel safe in that area. Traffic safety, the number one thing that makes my phone ring is our drivers. They're legendary. Our stop signs are only advisory. We have a cell phone, we have a cell phone ordinance, so people didn't get the memo. on and on and on and on and on. We can do better in that area too. Again, limited resources. Supporting our mental health, this really falls into the wheelhouse of Mr. Kukulski at this point based on our discussion, but we are ground zero for all the social services and the things that we're dealing with. So we would be remiss if we say we're not playing in that arena. We are a critical partner, so we would support that. Next slide, please. What I wanted to highlight here is pre-COVID. We identified what our strategies were, and we directed some activities by some specialized units, some of the members of our department, and this is what happened. When we were able to do the things we needed to do, be relatively fully staffed, leave people alone, let them do what they do, you can see that we drove crime down in those 6 categories in 2019. This is clear, definitive proof what we can do with proper staffing that can operate proactively. Next slide, please. Now we go COVID. We essentially see the justice system shutting down. We know what the problem was when the jail closed, whether it was for quarantine or overpopulation. Our homicides up 400%. That is deliberate and negligent. Drugs related to weapons. This is our drug unit alone. Anytime they're going and encountering people, they're getting those two together. And I will tell you, you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again, drugs drives violence. And here we see it. They're together more often. Aggravated assault, which includes our strangulations, which is domestic crime, up 52, and again, across the board. So what we're seeing, for a wide variety of reasons, that we've got this increase in violent crime. The anomaly we are in the nation is most people or most cities are seeing property crime, every other crime go down except gun violence. Ours, everything's going up a little bit. Not much, but everything's going up except the violence. So, can you go back in just a second? The saying in the quotes there, we told the voters pre-COVID, when we came out for the status quo, that we would be back. We would be back because we have a growing community and growing problems. We just didn't know when. Well, with numbers that you see on that slide now, I asked the question, if not now, when is it appropriate to ask? Thank you. Next one. This is our strategy based on the CPSM recommendations and my recommendation to the administrator, which he graciously granted some extra FTE, 6 sworn officers, and some support with that. I certainly asked for more. So here's a measured response with that. But this is what we want to do in year 1. 6 FTEs, officers and sergeants. You'll find those recommendations in that CPSM report along with my recommendation. The community service officers are the non-sworn that Mr. Kukulski talked about. I can answer questions on tasking if you like when we're done. Again, you can see where the recommendations, the evidence text, going to be very critical for us as we continue to roll out our body camera program and find some other tasks for them to help alleviate what we have going in detectives. And our clerical staff right now is absolutely decimated. If I got to hire people right now, today, it's going to be clerical. Next slide, please. This would be year 2. Very similar footprint to what you saw in year 1. And also in year 1 and year 2 would be the vehicles and all the stuff that goes along to support. I did not include a year 3, although Mr. Kukulski indicated he'd like to have it rolled out by then. We're going to be aggressive and try to get it done in 2. Year 3 will be what we didn't get done in year 1 and 2. So hopefully we don't have to come back for that. Next slide. One of the things that drove Mr. Ifland into city management and away from the police department was my math skills, and I didn't want to disappoint him here. The orange pie there represents O&M and some capital. That number should read 278,223. 278,223, not the 531. And that gives you a police ask of just under 2.5 million. Mayor?
Thank you, Councilor, Chief. So the pie graph is correct, but the big number at the top was the what was the number?
278,223 is what it should be.
So Mayor, I think the opposite. The number is correct at the top.
Yeah.
And the title, 2.4 million, but the pie chart, the small pie component is a small.
That should be 278,223, and then those numbers will add up.
Okay.
And that includes, this total number includes the extra FTEs approved or requested by me and approved. If you take those out from then you're less 8 from the CPSM recommendations, and I didn't figure those numbers because I'm confident you'll let me move forward with those.
Okay, thank you, Chief. We'll hold the questions for Chief till all of our presenters are done. We'll leave the math to Kevin Iflin in the future. Our next presenter, Wyeth. And Chris, could you get us, when we're done here, all of these slides?
Absolutely.
I bet you the council would appreciate that. So.
Absolutely. Just so you're aware, I got here about 5:15 or 5:20, and that's because I was still making tweaks at 5:10 this afternoon. So we will get you all these for tonight.
Thank you, Wyeth.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. So, code enforcement, and to just echo a little bit what Chief St. John said at the beginning, the code enforcement piece of this puzzle is a really important component of public safety, and that really comes down to where code enforcement's efforts dovetail very well with both police efforts and actually fire as well, in the aspects of if code enforcement can be out and seeing what's happening in the community, seeing what's happening to properties, hearing from the residents in the community, be able to respond more, not just to complaints, but to be out there looking for some of these issues. It enables us to be able to address some of the properties earlier so that we don't get them to the point of they've already attracted crime, they've already lit it on fire, et cetera, et cetera. We're able to have some of that response a little sooner versus now where we're complaint driven. So by the time we get a complaint, often some of those properties are pretty significantly in rough shape and neglected. So just to sort of bring that to this whole discussion. The other thing that code enforcement does is really boost the community in terms of both the clean aspect of it as well as the safe. So when we're out there being able to look at issues from landscaping, signage, junk vehicles, et cetera, that makes a difference across the community and what people's perception of the community is, how they feel about it, the pride that comes out of the community. And I'll tell you, even driving around in other cities in Montana, you can see areas where some of those things aren't responded to as well as even what we can do here through complaints, and you can tell what that kind of does in those communities when you see some of those things start to kind of pull down the look and feel of the community. So with that, next slide, please. So this is showing you our 10-year case volume for code enforcement. Basically, from 2011 to 2020, we've averaged about 4,400 cases a year. If you can hit the button, Kevin, please. Showing this area where you see the peaks, that's actually major weed complaints. So that's a year where we had really good rain at the right time and we had a lot of weeds at the right time in those 2 years. And if you can hit the button one more time. And then just showing you kind of where those peaks are versus the overall complaint levels that we're seeing if you take some of that higher weed volume off of the top and look at overall complaints. Because really, even though we see that ebb and flow depending on the weather, absolutely affecting that, we also are seeing consistently high numbers of junk vehicles and storage, salvage type complaints, consistently high numbers of junk vehicle calls in general for on private property. Obstruction of the public right-of-way is actually an increasing issue, and that can be whether it's not just vehicles, but it could be other things that have been improperly placed in the right-of-way or trees and things that are obstructing the right-of-way, blocking signage, things like that. And then also nuisance complaints, which really get into some of those real problem properties where we're dealing with unsafe structures and such. And that's actually hit 107 nuisance complaints in 2020, which in the past, before that, we were staying more down in the 60 to kind of 90 range. So that's also seems to continuing to increase as well. So next slide, please. So what does this look like in terms of code enforcement's abilities here with the investment proposed in the public safety levy information that you received tonight? So we're looking at about $356,000 in code enforcement additional resources with the proposed levy. That's 3 code enforcement officers, as you saw in the earlier slide from Mr. Kukulski. So really looking at this proactive compliance effort that we don't have in place right now. Being able to not just go from complaint to complaint, but being able to actually self-notice on some of these, self-report, and be out there and be able to see more of what's going on, have enough resources so that that's not just our situation of just dealing with the complaints. It also enables us to look at strategies for focusing in areas of town where we see more problems going on with properties, being able to take a little more resources to address that in an area versus, again, just dealing with the complaint calls that come in. And really then also in that respect, citywide, being able to respond to specific focus areas like graffiti tagging, which has been brought up in several times before and we see as a continuing issue. Also with signage issues and landscaping issues as well. Safe routes to school for kids and seniors. One of the discussions we've had with Public Works also is looking at areas where we have routes that students are trying to use for school. In the wintertime, that may be an issue if the snow isn't being cleared from property owners on their sidewalks. In the summer, it may be that there's brush and trees blocking crosswalk signs, blocking the sidewalk where kids are having to walk out into the street. So there's things like that that really can make some significant changes there on the safety side if we were able to take that time and have the ability to go and make those, address those. The other thing with, and you'll hear a little bit more on the legal side, the proposal does include some additional help for code enforcement and legal staff, which again is important for us when we do end up in a situation where we have to go to court and we need the legal expertise to help our officers prepare for those cases, which in turn, if we have that legal support, often makes us more successful when we get into those court situations. And so that's an important piece as well. The other thing that's in this proposal is actually some enhanced funding to be able to do programs and neighborhood cleanups. And I just want to touch on this real briefly. Nicole Cromwell, our code enforcement supervisor, quite a few years ago, back in 2010, spearheaded a couple of what we called neighborhood tune-ups, and that stood for Total Urban Neighborhood Enhancement Unified Program. So we'll work on that for next time, but that's the tune-up name. We did 2 of those, and she focused in areas where we were seeing higher crime rates, where we were seeing property problems. We were actually also looked at the public right-of-way and issues with alleys and the streetlights that were out, things of that nature. We did analyses in these areas of town, and then we went around, looked at the private complaints, looked at the public side. The city looked at its right-of-way and areas for improvements, went through, did a cleanup program, made it very positive, working with the neighbors, put dumpsters out for people to be able to clean up and have them address their violations that way. And what happened when we did that was we saw afterwards, up to 18 months and more after that was completed, were big decreases in calls for service. In one of the neighborhoods by Pioneer Park, we saw from pre-tune-up, the average was 47 calls for police, public safety calls per month. It went down to 6 calls per month. Code enforcement sort of saw 2 things happen. We had about 3 to 4 calls a month. Previously, we went down to 1, but we also saw fewer maintenance complaints about properties in those areas. And then also saw that there was actually more like renovation and building improvement activity that came after that. People decided, hey, this neighborhood, my area is feeling better. I'm seeing these improvements that the city has made in their right of way. I'm going to make some improvements too. So really significant if we're able to focus on those and start to work with our partners. And again, it wouldn't be code enforcement alone. We'd be working with other departments in the city and other organizations to be able to do those, but we really were able to see some significant turnaround in that area. So last slide, please. just the last piece, education and outreach, which kind of dovetails with what I just talked about. A couple of pictures on the bottom there are showing when we did the neighborhood tune-up effort and had the dumpsters out and worked in the park. And then the other side there is just showing a house recently that was completely redone and remodeled. But that outreach piece, working with the task forces, being able to go out and communicate with them, what does code enforcement do? How can we be involved in things that are happening in the neighborhood? And also connecting residents with programs. We try right now with the complaints we do get to make sure people are educated about the Council on Aging, Adult Protective Services, which comes up. We have some situations that are unfortunately very sad and difficult for elderly folks who are in not good situations with their property and with people that are taking advantage of them. So being able to work more on that area too is significant. So with that, I will stop and move on to the fire department. Or I'm sorry, the legal department.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to just start right with our focus is increased staffing, like everybody else. Increased staffing is obviously not just going to help reduce the workload of our staff, although I think that is an important consideration. It's a factor that should be considered because burnout is not uncommon in this field, and retention of knowledgeable and skilled staff is really important for an office like this. It's difficult to recruit qualified professionals and support staff when employees burn out so quickly because they're so overburdened. But this ask is not, this public safety mill levy request is not about the individual employee. It's not about making things easier for my staff. It's about a bigger issue, and we're talking about increasing the investments in staffing in this office because it will result in better services to the community and the overall public safety of Billings. So this slide is one that you saw previously during my budget presentation, and it shows the average caseload per prosecutor. With the addition of another prosecutor last year, we saw a decrease in caseloads for the non-domestic violence prosecutors, and that's the gray bar that you see there. But the domestic violence cases are continuing to increase, and that's the green bar that you see. With only one domestic violence prosecutor who had more than 1,200 cases to handle last year, it's not getting better. You can see it's getting a little bit better for the non-domestic violence prosecutors, but it's more than unmanageable at this point for the domestic violence prosecutor. It's also, go ahead and change. Next slide.
She switched there too.
It's frozen.
Is it on yours?
Yeah, it was on ours.
It's on mine.
So I just want to point out and note that our case numbers are not going down or really even stabilizing at this point. The trend seems to be a pretty significant continued increase. However, last year, you can see the numbers due to the pandemic or whatever it was, the numbers did go down a bit last year over 2019, but the overall trend shows a continuing increase over the last several years. We're not quite halfway through the year this year, but the numbers are more in line with the steady increase that we've been seeing. The next couple of slides I'm going to show you are to give some examples to show you what's kind of going on in the world of domestic violence prosecution and the effect it has on public safety. Here, the second column shows how many cases in the category of domestic violence were sent to our office for prosecution. The third column shows you how many cases we were actually able to file in court. The total number of cases filed continues to be consistent. You can see that in the third column. But we're not keeping up with the numbers that are referred to us. In 2015, we were prosecuting almost 90% of the cases referred, and in 2020, we prosecuted less than 50% of the cases that were sent to us. The next slide shows you what's happening with one specific offense within the domestic violence category. That's partner or family member assaults. The number of these assaults have been filed, the number that have been filed in let's see, 2015 has increased from 2015. So the third column shows we've been maintaining steady, increasing a little bit. But as you can see from the second column, the number of the offenses that are sent to us to be requested for prosecution is much greater than we can get filed. In 2020, again, 737 were sent to us to prosecute, but we're only able to prosecute 365 of them, less than 50%, whereas in 2015 we were at about 85%. So this slide is another, just kind of giving you another example of how what we do is affecting public safety. This slide is focusing on no contact order violations. That's a kind of a lesser known offense, but it's actually really important that these offenses are followed up on. A no contact order violation is something that occurs after a partner assault is charged and filed. The court then issues an order stating that the offender shall not have any contact with the victim, but when he does, that's a separate criminal offense. When he disregards that order and then contacts the victim, that's a new separate offense. Sometimes that contact is, blatantly coercive, but most of the time it's just really, really manipulative. It's designed, it's the kind of I love you, I miss you, I miss the kids, don't you miss me? It's that constant kind of barrage stuff that it's just really designed to wear them down so that they want to drop the charges, or so that they don't want to cooperate with the prosecution. Sometimes the offenders, directly tell the victim to lie to law enforcement or the prosecutor to get the charges dismissed or to somehow affect the case. When that kind of conduct occurs, that will generally result in a new felony offense if and when it's detected or investigated. So these are offenses that are really important to follow up on. They continue to endanger a victim. It affects their mental well-being.
Recording in progress.
Should I stop? Okay. It affects their mental well-being, it affects their physical safety, and it really affects the integrity of the case. An investigation of these offenses often begins with a report by a victim, but more frequently it's based on information that law enforcement receives from other sources. The most common example is when somebody's in jail and they are calling their victim using the jail phone system, which records all calls. And these offenses are really important to be investigated because they help provide leverage to resolve cases in order to hold the offenders accountable and to protect the victims. When these offenses go undetected or uninvestigated, there's just no accountability for the offender's actions. They commit new criminal offenses and their criminal behavior continues, and often it's emboldened and the behavior escalates and the cycle just continues on. So this slide, I'm showing you how these offenses are increasing over the last 6 years. And the second column, again, shows you what we've received in our office to be prosecuted. And the third column is showing you what we've been able to file. In 2020, again, we filed only about 30% of what was requested, whereas in 2015, it was about 77%. And as a side note, I included that last column, which shows law enforcement's ability to investigate these offenses has really decreased because they're only able to dedicate one officer to these investigations. So that's gone from 62% to 5%. So bigger picture is that the increased staffing will result in better victim services and serving the community as a whole more effectively. More prosecutors results in a reduced caseload. Reduced caseload results in more time for the prosecutors to dedicate to their cases. They can prepare for trials more thoroughly. They can just work the case more thoroughly. They'll have more time to review warrant requests, just essentially requests for prosecution to get people charged. For misdemeanors, we'll only have 1 year to charge these cases, and that may seem like more than enough time, but unfortunately, we're missing that statute of limitations. more often than we would like to, and so cases are going uncharged. So if we can get reduced caseloads, we'll get more people charged, less dismissals, less diversions, less deferred prosecutions. All of this will hold people accountable for their crimes. Additionally, if the public safety mill levy is approved as is, it has some additional funding in there for mental health and substance abuse, which could really be beneficial for the prosecutors in the court system, not just prosecutors, but in the court system to provide some alternatives for sentencing. It's not always effective just to fine somebody or just to jail somebody. Sentences which provide treatment to address their underlying issues, which are causing them to commit the offenses, is usually more effective and will hopefully reduce some people from becoming repeat offenders. Right now, substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment is often included in a judgment, but it's always at the cost to the defendant. They're responsible to pay for that. And many people cycling through municipal court, they just don't have the resources for that, and it just contributes to their becoming repeat offenders. And if they don't do what they're supposed to do, that's a failure to comply with their sentence, which results in new warrants, new court dates. It just repeats the cycle. So this additional funding, depending on how it's used, could provide alternatives that are not available now, whether that be housing assistance or mental health treatment follow-up or whatever it may be, provided at a lower or no cost to the defendant. Ultimately, the goal is offender accountability. We want to hold offenders accountable, and as you all are very well aware, there's this terrible cycle in Billings right now. Many offenders they know they won't be jailed for minor offenses. Therefore, they're committing crimes knowing that they're not going to be arrested, or that if they are arrested, they're going to immediately be released because there's no room in the jail. So they also know that there are likely not going to be any consequences if they don't appear in court. A new warrant for their arrest just really doesn't have much meaning at this point if they aren't going to go to jail. Basically, the same kind of thing is happening with the prosecution aspect. There are people out there who have gotten away with things that they shouldn't have. Due to our unfortunate lack of resources, a person may have committed a crime and just never been charged with that offense, and that's because our prosecutors have just been forced to choose between the worst of the worst. So the more that we can do our part to hold people accountable for their actions, the better we can impact that ripple effect in a more positive way. I think we'd have a big impact on public safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. One piece I just wanted to refer to before I turn it over to Deputy Chief Valdez is, unfortunately, Judge Kohler was not available for tonight. So we do have the numbers just a little south of 350,000. If you go back to some of my slides there, I had a group together. About 350K of that, 347 and change, is related to going from part-time second judge to full-time second judge and support staff to operate that. So if you want more details, like I said, unfortunately she wasn't available for this evening, but their office has been a part of our dialogue in figuring out what's the right, overall number to ask for in the overall public safety levy. And though so that kind of covers the core component. I'll turn over to Pepper to talk fire. As Chief St. John alluded to, not much of anything they do doesn't include a kind of fire component to it as well. So certainly, last but not least, is Deputy Chief Valdez, soon to be Fire Chief, to talk about the fire side. And then I've just got a couple slides to wrap up, and we'll be about perfect for your break.
Mayor, Council, good evening. I'll just dive right in. As City Manager Kukulski alluded to, we did talk about CPSM recommendations as it pertains to fire last week. And I did talk about our three-pronged approach that we would try to get underway that we feel would impact in a positive side what we feel is immediate and intermediate goals right off the bat. And the third part of that three-pronged approach involved the MRTs, which is our mobile response teams. And what does that look like? Essentially, estimated 10 personnel for staffing to be able to run 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. These individuals, be it 2 teams of 2 roving the city in lightweight type vehicles, capable of providing both basic life support and advanced life support care, non-transporting agency as such. Fully trained firefighters able to provide firefighting and rescue operations, etc. With that, this would be a separate division within our department, so we would need 1 division chief for program oversight and supervision. This individual would have complete oversight of employees, any HR issues, etc. Also, collateral duties would be emergency management, infection control officers, and oversight of priority dispatch in conjunction with our 911 director, and then maintenance and certifications of both EMT and paramedic certifications. 2 lightweight response vehicles, yet to be determined. Could be anywhere from a 3/4 ton pickup with the camper on it to a smaller SUV type. And then also the accompanying equipment and overhead maintenance that goes with that. This next key addition would be a fire protection engineer. And what a fire protection engineer does, this is a highly trained and educated individual that studies the causes of fires and how architecture and design influence the prevention and suppression of fires within these buildings. What does that do for us? Currently, whenever a contractor has to have the fire protection system installed or designed within their commercial building, they come to us and then we send that away to a third party. So we outsource that. So essentially we figured out over the last 6 years annually, we're losing about $87,000 a year that escapes our community. So by having that in-house, we can capture some of those fees. Also reduce plan review time, and then local control and face-to-face interaction with contractors, which will increase customer satisfaction for us. Next slide, please. Deputy Fire Marshal. So within our fire prevention division, you have a fire marshal, an assistant fire marshal, and then 3 deputy fire marshals. We have added a 4th through special assignment. And what this individual does, if you look at the bottom bullet point, that's the most important piece right there to take away from this position, is they'll conduct risk assessments on target hazards. And a target hazard can be a high-rise building. It can be a high occupancy institution such as a hospital, a school, nursing home, or it could be high fire load commercial properties such as your big box stores, Home Depot, Costco, etc. And how that pertains to us is they go out, they'll meet with the property owner, correct any fire code issues that there may be, and then bring that intel back to us so that we can better understand how to attack should there be an issue with that particular target hazard. So very valuable asset to us. Next slide. Logistics Officer, recommendation 5 of the CPSM report. This position currently a special assignment. They do research and acquisition of all equipment, and they manage our Check-It program. And our Check-It program is basically, it's a software program that oversees approximately worth of $5 million in equipment that we have, inventory and maintenance, and then networking, which helps to secure competitive pricing through building rapport by having an assigned individual to this particular need. And it's also worthy to note that this program is modeled after the BPD's logistics officer / quartermaster. Thank you. So basically, these are the key additions that we're asking for, and we feel that will increase efficiency for us, reduce overtime costs, and also help us to capture some of the fees that are escaping our community. Thank you.
Thanks to all the directors. So in wrap up here, last couple of slides, just a reminder, right? We've been at this together. since many of you were elected the last cycle, and I came here in late 18. But we've refined our strategies, as Chief St. John talked about. You can literally pull back that presentation that we gave you and gave the public numerous times, including in this room with the public, talking to them about the levy. But those were the base, and then we refined them based on the data. And they really did reduce our overall ask and our request in most areas. So this really is a more efficient delivery based on that third-party advice to us, and we've pointed out for you what those where this ties directly to the report and some of the other areas. The chief is also Chief St. John. It's had a little bit more time than Deputy Chief Valdez, who isn't even in the job yet and is only a week off of the report. About half of the recommendations of the 102 are at varying stages, from completed to under review to being implemented, and we can talk more about those in detail tonight or in the upcoming weeks if you want to see where things are there. So last slide, just overall, want to remind you this is an overall comprehensive, targeted approach to improve the safety of Billings. It relies on our collaborative partners, as Chief St. John talked about. We cannot do this work without them or be effective without them. We are targeting working with our neighbors in neighborhoods, both commercial and residential, at that baseline level, as well as investing in mental health and substance abuse through those partnerships. It's not my intent there that we would bring on staff individuals in this way. It would be that we would use that little north of $400,000 as grants, if you will, in partnership with entities who that is their expertise, not our expertise. We're overall certainly looking, if you remember back to the report on law enforcement side, we really want to get to a point where we're preventing more crimes, which helps this whole cycle of work that is coming in. And when our officers can do that proactive police work, as the chief showed in 19 before the pandemic, we really were making some headway. As our city attorney referenced, our goal really is to help our victims, and for those who commit crimes, hold them accountable. In an ideal world, if we do that earlier on in their life and their cycle, help them get out of this cycle, which is just adding a tremendous amount of work and concern and cost overall to our community. And last, but again, certainly not least, the efficient deliverance of 911 calls that come in for police and fire services. Both these reports go in depth as to how to improve that efficiency. So I know it's easy to kind of conclude when we're at a night like this and we're talking about a very, very significant investment, $7.1 million a year. There's a lot more money being included that's being gained through efficiencies than just asking to throw more money and more people at the problem. Most of those recommendations are in efficient delivery of services, not more money and more people. But unfortunately for us, we're a growing community. Unfortunately, we're having a growing crime problem and a growing calls for service into our fire department, and those require, personnel to respond. So with that is our presentation. I'm sorry. I did want to touch on one other component here briefly, and that is Fire Station 8. That question came up a week ago. I expect it to come up again tonight. So basically what we've talked about is what we know are immediate needs. And we project into the near future as to how to deal with those. And if we can flatten the curve, if we go back to maybe some of what was talked about through the pandemic, if we can flatten the curve and ultimately lower the curve, then we will have our criminal justice services working more and more in favor of us instead of chasing higher and higher numbers. On the fire side, at some point, if we continue to grow, we know there will be a point where we will need to add that 8th fire station. But at this point, we don't know where and we don't know exactly when. If the council wanted to think out or be inclusive in this levy 5 years or longer, then you could include that. We know we're roughly looking at 11 mills. But we think pretty solidly it's going to be 3 years from today that we have fully rolled out the mobile response teams, analyzed that data on those mobile response teams, and known what the effect will be. So we're grateful to be having this immediate discussion and what we can do with it. If the council wants to tackle that Station 8 component, because we've had 2 public safety levies in the past 2 years, that's what we have to acknowledge. We don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly where, but we do think it's pretty probable 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, we will need to have built an 8th fire station. The current budget and the plan was to finish that in the next fiscal year. Was between the proposed budget and next year, we would secure land if and when if we know where land is. In the West End, that's a little bit easier thing to define than in the Heights area. We can talk about that if you want to more later. The station, the apparatus, equipment, and staffing for that. Cash through CARES, the recommendation's been to set that aside. The staffing is the key that you either need to go back to the voters with in some future date, or do you want to include it now? That really is a policy political decision. And if we could totally read a crystal ball and know which will the citizens be more amenable to, we're comfortable with our current ask, meeting immediate needs, and we're really ask you if you want to tackle that midterm, long-term issue about Station 8. Either way, we believe we can make a substantial difference in improving service delivery to our community. And I think that's probably it. The numbers are there if you want to see them, want to have that discussion deeper, that just what does Station 8 do to it? Takes us from $100 to $130. Next slide. You see basically it adds $30 to that typical home. Keep going. The additional staffing for future 8 is what would be included if those additional 11 mills are added. And there you see where we were a year ago to where we are today with some of those efficiencies. And the absolute kind of drop dead timeline as we work forward here to the November ballot is this first reading in July, second reading in August. My plea, candidly with you guys, is that we not wait until late June, July, and August. If we can, if we've got the information we need, I'd ask you to please consider first reading tonight. We can show you specifically the language. We send it to you this afternoon. We can pull it up if you want. Station 8 included. That's what was sent in the packet material publicly. That's the last conversation we had with this. Some of you asked that Station 8 be included, so that's what was in the packet. We can pull up for you tonight so you can see explicitly what the language looks like if you remove that, moving forward without Station 8 in first reading. And with that, Mayor, turn it back over to you if you want to take the break now and go to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Council, it is 7:41, so we will take a break now, then we'll come back. What I would propose is that we move straight to public comment. When we do come back, I could kick it back to council for questions, but I think it'd be impossible to distinguish between questions and comments and motions. That would be difficult to control how long that's going to go. So I don't expect a huge amount of public comment. There certainly will be some. So let's come back. Let's get our open up for public hearing. We'll get those comments. We can take those into account when we go to discussion after the public hearing closes. So next up, public hearing, but it's 7:41. Let's be back no later than 7:50. That's 9 minutes. If we can start before then, that would be great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll open it up for public hearing then on item number 5, the proposed public first reading on the proposed public safety mill levy. We will look first at anybody who's in the library, and then we will take comments from anybody who is with us by Zoom. Just a reminder, if you're with Zoom, when we get to that, you'll need to use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Find the little hand, click on it, and that way Tony will know to take you off mute. But first we'll look to people here in person in the library. So if you'd like to comment on public safety, the proposed public safety levy, please come forward, tell us your name, ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, and your address, please.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Honorable Council. My name is Mike Nelson. My address is 19 North Broadway. That's the fabulous Northern Hotel in beautiful downtown Billings, Montana. I'm wearing 2 hats tonight. First as a business owner in the fabulous downtown area, and also as the chairman of the board of the Billings Chamber of Commerce. So we spoke about this public safety mill levy on May 17th, and I was excited to get to come up and talk to you guys. One of the things I said was, on the 17th of May in 2021, we had 35,500 calls for service from our police. Those are incident numbers, crime calls for service. Today's June 14th, so we're about 28 days later. 41,460 calls for service today, with 9 calls backed up at any one time. Those are people waiting for service, not on hold, but waiting for an officer. One of them was to the Northern Hotel. So having said that, I can tell you that as a downtown business owner, and also I'm authorized to say for the Chamber of Commerce, that we support the public safety mill levy. We do. We want you to pass it. We ask you to pass it. We urge you to pass it. We also ask you, when you're thinking and considering your votes, to put the trust in your department heads. They've all made some really great asks. I think we need to understand that they're the experts in their fields. The chief says it's not all police, that it's everybody on this team, and I believe it. I think this public safety mill levy that was proposed tonight is a nice, holistic approach. That means we can get our arms around it, or at least start to get our arms around a program. There's some mental health issues, so that maybe we could stop it. If you want to talk about what mental health could save us, just come talk to me about the 40 years of prison sentences that have been doled out for crimes around the Northern Hotel in the last year. It's $1.5 million that we could probably have saved with $35,000 or $40,000 of mental health. I'm not about forgiving people. I'm about accountability, but I think if we could take a more efficient tack. And there's room in here in this budget to hold people accountable. Holy cow, let's do that. Let's not make our police pay for tigers. Let's give them something and back them up with a court system that works and with a legal system that works. And by all means, let's back up our fire department. So guys, fund the police, fund the fire department, and fund everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments here in the library?
Hi, my name is Anna O'Donnell, and I live at 131 Avenue B. A couple things. I want to say that as also chairperson of the Pioneer Park Task Force, my largest meeting, and we're a small but fierce group, my biggest meetings are when this chief came to talk about stats for public safety. When you guys held public safety in our parks, that's what makes people get out. That's what their concern is. I appreciate that it is a team effort. It's definitely a team effort. One of the things I would like to say is that, I also sit on the board of the Memorial Firefighters Run, and I showed off my stellar bike skills by volunteering this last Friday for it, being the sweeper. And it was just amazing to be out there with firemen that were, and honoring firemen that have fallen. And then coming back, I, do what every citizen does. I pull aside and I see a fire truck go by. And I just think how amazing that, one, that my father loved that job. But secondly, that we have the capacity to increase the safety for our citizens, that everybody can feel safe. One of the things I do want to advocate, and I know you saw me a lot previously, is Station 8. We're overgrown now. Let's not look 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Why are we prolonging this? We are already playing Tetris with people's lives. When a fire department has to go cover a call somewhere, it puts everybody in jeopardy because we're understaffed. Yes, I think this is a great idea that we're looking at a strategy to fill the service holes. Definitely, I think we're on track with that. I do want to say that I also think we need to get a bus buy-in and have those citizens that live outside the zone pay into this and have that opportunity as well. I just think that it's $30 extra. $30. We're talking about lives. We're talking about opportunities for our city for $30. I guess I'm a little confused about that. I would give up a race. I would give up coffee. I would give up a couple dinners out to add to that. I also want to say that I want to make sure when we do look forward into implementing staffing and also the current situation that's come to light, I want to make sure that we develop a system where we're taking care of the people that take care of us. So if they're at the airport or if they're anywhere else, they're taking care of us, they're taking care of our city, and we should be able to come to an agreement to take care of them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commenters here in the library?
Your Honor, are we on number 6?
No, number 5, public safety mill levy still. Anybody else here in the library? Anybody else in the library on number 5, public safety mill levy? If not, we'll move on to online. Do we have anybody on Zoom? If so, use that raise your hand feature. Tony, do we have anybody out in Zoom land?
I have not had anyone raise their hand to speak.
Okay, if there's nobody else here in the library, we will go ahead and close the public hearing on item number 5. Not seeing anybody else, so public hearing is closed on item number 5. We'll kick it to the council. What I'll ask the council is that you try to focus first on factual questions for staff. I'll make sure that everybody's had a chance to either ask questions, or if you want to make comments, don't feel you have to stay just strictly to questions. But I did have a request that we not immediately jump into a motion on this matter because there is a desire to have some discussion and opportunity for questions. So you can use your discretion in that, but let's make sure that we give all of our council members an opportunity to at least ask some questions and make some preliminary comments before we go immediately to a motion. With that, how about let's start with questions. Council members Neese, Boyette, and Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. This question is actually going to deal with code enforcement, something that I look forward to us expanding a little bit. So if Wyatt could answer these questions for me. Wyatt, you mentioned proactive code enforcement. This plan would move us to code proactive. I don't believe the council's debated on that, whether we want proactive. This vote may actually say that. But I'm not in favor of proactive enforcement. So you get a lot of calls. How many staff would it take to just be able to adequately staff to handle the calls that are coming in so people can get a good response, an adequate response? So how many staff are you adding now, and how many less would it take just to be adequately staffed and not actually driving around looking for problems to find the city?
Councilmember Neese and Mayor and Council, and yeah, I appreciate the question. as we just talked at the break, that's not something that we've looked into in terms of this sort of scenarios, in terms of having that just, continuing to be complaint only responsive versus some proactive. And I guess, so I don't have a great answer right out of the gate for you on what that would look like staffing wise to I guess we'd have to figuring out like what that complaint expectation, the response for complaint expectations is right now versus what that, what we'd be trying to do with additional staff only to respond more rapidly. So I guess we'd have to look at that. We can certainly sort of do some brainstorming on that. Code enforcement, our supervisor, Nicole Cromwell's on the meeting as well, so she's hearing all this as well to try to figure that out. I guess I would, to sort of expand on the concept, part of what this is proposing to do is it's not just, and it's not only, out patrolling. There's the idea of proactive response is also to, as I mentioned a little bit before, look at areas and of town and places where we're noticing issues, whether it's both a combination of property issues, right-of-way obstruction issues, things like that, and trying to be more focused and purposeful about trying to go out and work with those areas of the neighborhoods and the community, work with both our departments in the city to try to make some improvements. So it's not only just going around looking for whatever every single violation that's out there. So I guess I want to mention that that's part of what's proposed in the strategy. Secondly, when we do, like right now, the only I guess sort of proactive response we can do is if we're on a street and we have a violation that's a camper trailer on the street, for example, and we see two more on that street, we will certainly send a notice to those other property owners. The key there is that we send notices in a lot of cases versus immediately, citing them or taking them to court or something. So that would continue with this new change. We would still be doing that. It wouldn't change kind of how we try to give people, the opportunity to come into compliance and deal with those issues and not just go straight to, citations or court. So at this point, I guess that's the best I can do, but we could certainly do some follow-up on that question about kind of responsiveness. But I guess part of the challenge we have is I'm not sure, we certainly have people who call us and say, gosh, I've seen all these issues and no one's, you haven't taken care of them. I haven't heard as much of, I filed the complaint and it's taking too long. However, I will certainly say with some of our nuisance issues, those really problem properties, yes, those take a longer time and people become extremely impatient for a good reason in some cases because we get into court and it takes a long time. But I would say I don't have a good sense of our kind of like what that responsiveness would be, but we can certainly discuss it and take a look at it.
Thank you. There is another question regarding code enforcement.
Go ahead.
And we talked about this a little bit too, this is one of the reasons I'm not sure I like the proactive side. I want the community involved. And it's rather difficult to file a complaint. At least I find it difficult. We have great technology. Is any of this money going to involve the community more by developing technology to make it easier? With geotechnology we have, you can take a picture, know exactly where it's at, and easily send that to code enforcement to let them know there's graffiti or a problem. Today, I hear complaints about, I remembered I saw this problem, but I don't remember where it was. I'll have to drive by it again and try to remember to write it down or stop. So a lot of stuff doesn't get reported, and if we involve our community more and give them the ability to do that, I think that would be the proactiveness I would like to see as a community, not ours hiring people to be proactive. Does any of this help address involving the community more and really reporting this, self-reporting themselves so they can clean up their own neighborhoods?
Yeah, so Councilmember Neeson, Mayor and Council, so two things kind of to your question. Certainly, yes, part of this with the education and outreach component is to help get out there more, talk to groups and organizations and have them understand better what code enforcement does, what are the kind of complaints and violations that they should be reporting, how to do that under our current situation. So we don't get an opportunity to do that very much, and I know that would be, when we do get out and talk to a task force or talk to an organization, we find that that helps them better understand, okay, I'm out and I see something, oh yeah, that's a code enforcement thing. Now I make the connection and then I can make the complaint. So this would certainly help in that area of being able to be out more, both physically and potentially through media and other ways to help people understand, like, okay, yeah, these are code enforcement issues that you should be and can report through this process. The idea of a better way to electronically make complaints, I think, is a great idea. And there's been, we're not, I don't want to speak for others and such here, but we've had discussions certainly internally and more so in the last few years about how all types of complaints get reported through the city. And are there different ways or different tools that we should be looking at to make that easier, to your point, whether it's through, a picture or some kind of, call in, whatever that might be, that makes it quicker and more, you can get that information to the city quicker. So I would say that's an ongoing conversation. And Councilman or Mr. Kukulski can respond, but we don't have, at least in our code enforcement budget here, like specifically like a software item, but.
Okay. Chris, you want to comment in response to that?
Mayor and council, so just a little bit I'd add is so the proposal includes 3 code enforcement officers. Over on the legal side, one of the paralegals is to help with cases, and some of the director's salaries. So right now, code enforcement really is just evolved very slowly over the years, and they don't cover, kind of some of their overhead components. That's what's in the levy request, as well as equipment for those positions and to do that work. I think we absolutely can roll up our sleeves, figure out, hey, are there software investments we can make to help us? My suspicion is, though this is just my guess, is I get nervous for how few people are associated with rolling this out. I think we should. Our citizens will help us report. Then they're going to expect a response. I think we're going to find that the expectation is that we respond, and that we have the capacity to respond if they're literally on their phone popping us 1, 3, 5 violations a day that they're seeing in the community. So we absolutely not afraid to have technology be a part of a better system, for sure. I doubt that's going to reduce, at least in the short term. Hopefully in the long term it would reduce if we could get on top of kind of where we've been with decades of really only complaint driven and kind of the worst of the worst. Deputy Mayor Yakowicz, I think, has got as much or more experience than any of us talking about, as an elected official, trying to move the needle on code enforcement issues and the challenge of not a lot of resources to do it.
Thank you, Chris. If I can just make a statement, because I think this touches on a very important, large issue, and correct me if my understanding isn't correct. We've heard tonight a plan for various FTEs from various departments. But that is not an approved, none of those are approved budget items, even if we move forward with the public safety mill levy. And this council would still have to come back and approve a formal budget. Those FTEs might go up, might go down, might get massaged, but they are still a necessary recommendation by staff at this point, but they are only recommendations, and so there may be some evolution. But we need to have a starting point, and that's what you've given us. Is that a fair description? When you start talking about specific FTEs, the way to look at this, is that should that be our understanding?
Mayor and Council, I think that is a fair review. Now, especially around, positions and uniforms, what I've found over the years is the public gains an expectation as we talk about numbers. And we've been careful, frankly, to not be overly specific on those numbers, but we've wanted to be specific enough to let you know where's the data come, or what data are we using to calculate staff and support to get to where we are. And you are correct. The budget process ultimately is your ultimate key to managing me and ultimately the department heads as to what resources you allocate to them if the voters approve the additional capacity by the elected body to set mills at a higher level.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go back to our Councilmember Poyet and Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. This question may be probably for Chris, and it would probably involve the legal department and the police department. When I drive around Billings every day, I look at businesses' names on their signs, and there's 2 words right behind their name. It's called now hiring. What if this mill levy was approved, I as a citizen, how realistic is it that we can even fill these positions in a timely manner? I know the legal department just finally finished hiring an attorney, I think, that had been vacant for some time. Chris, can you help?
Sure.
What would be the expectations of the public once, if this was approved, to fill all of these positions?
So we have to deal with the reality of what we face here post, or maybe I shouldn't be saying post-pandemic. Probably someone's going to tell me we're not post yet. 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we had a number of vacancies in the police department, in code enforcement, in legal, in building inspection. We're about as close to fully staffed as we can be. In fact, in the police department, we're slightly overstaffed. Now, some will argue about those numbers because some of the overstaffing still has people in training. But as we added those positions, one could argue if just on the table, well, hold it, we've had all these vacancies. Have we been able to do a better job filling those? I think the answer is unequivocally yes. In the short term, where we're really struggling is in the seasonal work. You're hearing that kind of across the board, although HR has said they've made some decent headway there. And our commitment is that we will fill these positions, and we'll face that head on to the best of our ability. And I think our track record shows we can fill key slots. Maybe not as timely, or wish we had exactly phase 1 within 60 days, but we've been able to fill critical full-time permanent positions. And frankly, I think doing a better job getting our message out with part of our conversation about information, I think we can do a better job of being seen as an employer of choice for citizens and for community members. So I'm optimistic. I hope I'm not overly optimistic. I would welcome any of the department directors to offer any comment to add to information relative to your question. Can we fill legal positions that we open? Right now, we're fully staffed, right? We're close to it for...
We have one open position because we've chosen not to fill it in anticipation of some budget changes, hopefully. But as far as for prosecutors, we generally get a pretty decent response. I would say we probably don't get as many responses as we used to a few years ago, but we get a lot of applications. We won't have any trouble filling our positions.
Chief, you want to comment? And I'm curious for
Councilmember, Mayor and Council. I guess I will confidently and kind of teetering on arrogantly, I will say that the Billings Police Department is an employer of choice. We have people coming to us from across the country now. At one point in time, and being overstaffed is kind of a unicorn for us because it only lasts for a couple weeks. We were plus 5. Authorized 154, we're running at 159. I've had a retirement and a couple resignations. Okay, so we are overstaffed and continue to hire. Where I have trouble is with the civilian positions. So our clerical staff is down 2 right now, critical to our operation. If they're not going, we're not going. And again, this goes to your financial situation. When somebody was telling me they went to McDonald's or Wendy's and says $15 an hour, and we're offering $12, $13 for an entry-level clerical. So, we have to work through those things. We're trying to come up with something creative to make it more palatable for working mothers, for example. I'm going to take a full-time FTE, split it in half, be flexible with time, and try to do things like that to get people, to make people want to come here. The Community Service Officer Program that is recommended in CPSM, 7 of them, brand new. We're recommending $60,000 or so in salary. You're going to get some retired cop to take that. So I'm very confident that, that's why I gave you a 2-year aggressive hiring on that, and then give me year 3 to fix what we didn't get in year 1 and 2. But I think we'll do, we'll be okay getting those fielded. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Unless any other department heads want to comment, and obviously feel free at any point. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Chief, I have a question about the first year and the second year. You have said you wanted 3 evidence, and I wasn't quite clear on the exact job title, but you're adding 3 in the evidence area the first year and 2 for identification, which would be in the evidence area, I believe. So is that tied to a specific recommendation from the study, or how are you seeing that kind of situation?
Council member, that is tied to a recommendation. Total of 5 ID techs is what they were calling them, but we have flexibility on where we can use them. When I asked the evidence Lieutenant Hart, who operates that, he says he just needs 3 to help with the intake of evidence, to help with the processing of body camera data and discovery requests, and the other 2 we can use to supplement things in other parts of the department. Help with our crime analysts, helping detectives primarily. You heard Gina talk about the domestic violence. I got one officer doing domestic violence, and a lot of the cases are made on jail calls. Somebody's got to sit there and listen to them to gather the evidence that they need. So we're very flexible on what it is that they can do. The other thing that was proposed, which I find rather, TV-ish, if you will, is that that group would go out on major crime scenes like they do on TV, and they would process it and take directions and do the fingerprints, pictures, collect the blood, a real-life CSI team. The theory is we free our detectives up to do the investigative, the interviews, and that type of work. So again, that report is for efficiency and effectiveness. And so they're saying, take that stuff away from your investigators, give it to civilians, highly trained, specialized, and let this group go do other things. More efficient, and it's cheaper.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmembers Purington and Ronning and Ewald.
Well, Chief, just to have said, no, this is just a quick one. So these, the community service individuals, the officers, you mentioned they'd have to be highly trained, because I know those detectives are highly trained. So part of that cost would be in the training of those people, unless they former law enforcement, that they've had some of that, I would assume.
Yeah, that's correct. And the theory is exactly the same. Community service officers are non-sworn. They don't carry a gun. We may give them a badge, we may not. They'll definitely have a police car with a different light on it. So it's very clear that they are not a police officer, a sworn officer. And what they will do is handle those minor cases that tie up our officers' time. A property damage accident, no DUI, no injury. A theft, broken car window, vandalisms, parking complaints. They'd work hand in hand probably with Wyeth's crew on some of the camper stuff and the boats in conjunction. In the meantime, that takes that call off of the plate of an officer, and now they can go do proactive work and get into other stuff. Again, free them up to do more important stuff, yet still provide that service for the community at a cheaper price. That's what the theory is behind that.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if you want to go with this one or Chris, maybe both. But two of the things, and I think it was on Chris's slideshow on maybe slides 5 and 6, under your proposal was criminal accountability and victim advocacy. And it's my understanding that victim advocacy is through the county. They actually get money for that. And then on the criminal activity, again, to me, that goes back to jail time and putting some of these people off the streets. Those two things are county. How do we advocate to the county to give us more jail space and so that we can hold criminals accountable? Because even if we have more officers, but we can't put them in jail, and I know that is evidently a major component of some of the officers, is that, you know, they don't see any rewards for what they've been through to get them there.
Councilmember, you're absolutely right. That is frustrating, not only for our officers, but for deputies and troopers in the county. The victim advocacy programs both are at the county and in Gina's office as well. So you have victim services there. We don't get involved in that other than, you know, we're on the front end, so it's important we do it right so we don't scar people for life. And what I would say to you is, you know, you're right. I mean, we definitely need help from our partners. And we are working very hard across the board behind the scenes to come up with remedies, whether it is incarceration for people or get them into treatment. But at the end of the day, council member, I would tell you, we can only control what we can control. And I can't say, you know, don't give us what we're asking for because on the back end another agency isn't helping us out or we don't have room. Let's work that problem as a community, but don't stop any support for what we're asking for you here because of that, because we're going to go and do what we do and people are going to see, you know, here's where the jam up is. It's not, enforcement's not the problem. It's on the back end, and we've always said that's on the back end that we're trying to remedy. So that's just, I guess, the one thing that I would ask you to consider in your deliberations.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning and then Ewald.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Chief St. John and Gina. And Mr. Nelson, I was one of those calls for service today too, and I'll talk more about that when we get to comment. But first question, Chief St. John, on the slides where you show violent crimes, are those violent crimes both misdemeanors and felonies or just felonies?
Those are felonies.
So
they're aggravated assaults is what we are reporting, and we do have a significant number of misdemeanor assaults, but that's not what we report when we do the crime stats.
Right. So when we're looking at that slide and it shows violent crimes, are domestic violence? There's a significant number of domestic violence crimes that are just misdemeanors, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so those aren't even in those numbers then?
That's correct.
Yeah.
What is referenced would be the strangulation. Yeah. Cases are in the aggravated assault. PFMA, without aggravating factors, is a misdemeanor. So that's a whole nother set of numbers. And all the case references that Gina, we're doing them. We're handling those cases and passing them off to her staff for charging and or review.
Yeah, so that leads to my second question, which is similar to some of the questions that have been asked. So we hear a lot about domestic violence from City Legal and from your department. And I'm not asking you to commit, nor am I asking Gina to commit in right now with what Mayor Cole was talking about in regard to specific employees, FTEs that would be dedicated. So we've heard kind of general numbers in regard to who you would be considering hiring. So in regard to domestic violence, would you be considering an additional officer or detective to help Detective Katie Nash? And then if so, is that the partnership then that you would need for City Legal to have an additional attorney prosecuting those domestic violent crimes? Would that need to coincide?
Yeah, certainly it would be helpful. Yes, part of my plan is to augment Detective Nash's capability, right now I'm using people that are on light duty and hurt to help out with stuff. But yes, that would be one area. And then, of course, we're generating, in theory, twice the case referrals. In theory, nobody's going to match what Detective Nash does, obviously. But then if Gina's on the back end, has got to have to handle that. Otherwise, you're going to see referred to and filed are going to have the big discrepancy again.
Yeah.
So again, and you've heard me say this before, and then I'll take a seat, but if you change anything in the justice system, it's going to affect everybody else. If you add cops and you don't do anything at the jail, you don't do anything with the clerical, you don't do anything with the legal, they're going to have an issue. If you take them away, same type of thing. It's cause and effect every single time. So whatever change you make or don't make will have an effect across the whole justice system specifically, and now when you throw the rest of the public safety in, you'll see that as well. Add more officers, and we can't, we're overwhelming Wyeth's crew on stuff, vice versa, so.
Yeah, thank you. And then not to commit you either, Gina, but would you say that one of those part of the employee group would be to address domestic violence?
Well,
just to clarify that.
Our current budget proposal already includes another domestic violence prosecutor that's partially grant funded if that's approved. So yes, but I also want to point out that we're already behind. So even if there weren't any cops added, and you already saw the big disparity. So we're already behind. We already need more, even without adding more cops, which are going to result in more cases. So adding more cops means we're going to need more than what we're even asking for now. So without committing, clearly that's what I foresee is we just need to catch up first, and then. And that's what we're trying to do right now with this budget request and our mill levy request.
Okay, thank you. And then if I can have one more question, Gina, can you, there's a big difference. I think oftentimes when people hear victim services, they don't understand the difference between victim services at the court level, at your level, and community victim services. Those are two very different services that are provided. What are the victim services that your office provides? What do those employees do?
They are a bit different. So yes, the county attorney's office does have a victim witness specialist program. I don't know how many victim witness specialists they have, but they do. Our office currently has 3 victim witness specialists. We don't call them advocates because they do work in tandem with our prosecutors and victim witness advocates who are independent of the court system and work for private agencies have a different obligation, and there's a lot of confidentiality involved. Our victim witness specialists do some advocacy for the victims, but it is within the court system. There isn't that same kind of confidentiality. They share the information with the prosecutors in order to further those cases. Our victim witness specialists still provide all kinds of referrals and resources and services to the victims, but it is a bit different in the types of advocacy that they do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ewald. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for Chris, I believe. When we first did this, we had a right now, a better, best, kind of scenario. I've heard several times now that we're addressing our immediate needs with this mill levy. Are we going any further beyond that? Are we looking at 2 years, 3 years, 10 years that we may have to come back again? I just think we have a real opportunity right now.
Absolutely. So as we looked at the request, we didn't only look at what we're facing today. There is some anticipation in there. certainly on the law enforcement side. And so, it makes me nervous as much as what happened in the last 12 months, but it was certainly our plan that we would not, at the earliest, we would be back talking about additional resources outside of the fire station issue, would be 5 years from now. And hopefully, closer to between 5 and 10, but that was kind of the target we were looking at.
Thank you. I'm good with that then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, other council members. Councilmember East will come back. I just want to make sure if there's other council members. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. This is for the new fire chief, Chief Valdez. I'm going to just call you Chief because you're going to be chief soon enough. I like this package. I think it's really comprehensive and great across the board. The variable for me and the question is really Fire Station 8. And I know nobody can answer this. This is really tossed up in the air and we just have to make a decision. But I would like to hear you talk specifically about that a little bit and where you see that need coming in just from your professional experience, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, kind of your perspective.
Sure. Just at first, just because the report is so new to us, I'd say it's going to take 9 to 12 months to even develop the program and the right program for the MRT. And then there's going to be, once that is implemented, we're going to need to take at least a year, maybe a year and a half to analyze that and see if it has given us a positive impact on our service model. Then at that point, it allows us to take a look and see, if we're still going to need the fire station, and it also gives us a breather because everybody knows there's a lot of development going on in the Heights with all their infrastructure. There's a lot of development going on in the West End with possibly a medical school, and we know that they're going to break ground on the reservoir next year. So we really need to take a good look and see what's going to happen there. So I would say my timeline is more 3 to 5-ish in there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Yakowicz.
Thank you. Since everyone had a chance to speak that wanted to, we'll go to another round, but I'm going to make the motion. Having conducted a public hearing, consider written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance amending City Charter Section 1.05.2, public safety mill levy as recommended by staff.
Okay, Councilmember, just to clarify your motion, that includes the Station 8?
No, it does not include Station 8.
Okay, because just to clarify, what's in the packet is Station 8. There is another one that was sent around that did not include Station 8. Maybe this would be, if that's your intent.
That is my intent.
Okay, and we'll ask staff to put that up so we can see exactly what we're talking about. But was there a second on that motion? Councilmember Brown makes the second. Can we just ask for clarification from staff to exactly what the document is we're talking about then?
We're going to pull that up for you. Gina's pulling it up. Actually, I'm going to let Gina kind of walk us through it. There's 2 changes to this.
Well, this is the one with 34 mils. Do you want the other one up first?
No, I think actually the motion is 34 mils. So Gina, as I understand it, the 2 changes to this, one is we didn't quite catch when the packet went out, which is we described in the ballot, we had some of the ballot language components to the $100,000 home and the $200,000 included, and that doesn't need to be included in this piece. So that's removed. But more importantly, this is the 34 mils, not the 44 mils. And there is a slight, you'll notice there is a slight tweak there as well. When we split them, it was 33, close to 33.7, I think it was, and maybe 10.3, and we just divided it 11 and 33. Since for the option of not going the station, we did want to capture that 3/4 of a mil or go to 34 so that we didn't short ourselves right out of the gate with a full implementation of the plan. So what you see here is the 34 So therefore, there is no phasing in, it's 1 year. Because again, if the voters say yes this fall, the collection comes a year later, in late 2022. And that's, anything else, Gina? Everything else should be word for word, what was in the packet material. We just had this ready to go in case the station was not included and rounded up that millage.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, this is what you sent around to the council as a sample mid-afternoon today?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and Councilmember Yakowicz, just to reconfirm, this is the content of your motion, 34 mills.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and the second by Councilmember Brown, I assume that was your second as well, Councilmember Brown?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, so they both confirmed that. Now, discussion on the motion, which may also include other questions. Can I ask you to take that down, then we'll be able to see everybody. Thank you. So discussion on the motion, additional questions, however you'd like to proceed. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. This is questions for the chief, police chief. That CPSM report, that's a great report. I'm glad we did that. That's one of those things that the city's done. We can do that again in 5 years to get some more information. But you mentioned that you had already implemented some of these things. 104 was on the list. I don't want to, not interested in a lot of the items, but about how much of the list have you completed? And I have a secondary question on your ask. The report indicated how much, and all your asks were kind of related to where that report was, which is a good tie-in. But then there's an additional 8. So that wasn't in the report. Can you explain why that's necessary, even though the report didn't really indicate that it was?
Councilmember, thank you for the question. Yes, there was 102 recommendations by CPSM, and I will tell you that they really fell under the umbrella of 3 major categories, and that is facilities, staffing, and our organizational structure. And their assessment was those are the 3 areas that's really hindering us from providing the very best service and really excelling more than we already are. Facilities, obviously, that's not in my pay grade at this point. Staffing is what we're talking about now, and it's directly correlated with our organizational structure. And that is because we have been flattening our organization for so many years that we're out of whack. And we try very hard. We're a paramilitary organization, and we need to maintain our span of control, which is about 1 supervisor to 5 to 7 officers. If we get any bigger than that, then we have trouble keeping track of things and keeping our thumb on what's going on. And so those things are correlated. Of all the recommendations, there's 102, but I broke them down into 6 major categories, if you will. There was 19 dealing with our operations, 32 for investigations and evidence, 13 for professional standards, 21 for training, FTO program, hiring, PR, 9 for SROs, DVI, STEP volunteers, and then miscellaneous had another 8. We have completed 19 of the recommendations in various areas, and I can give you a detailed list later if you like. 18 are underway, 12 are under review, and 10, a lot of them overlap, fall with you. We can't do anything because it requires additional FTEs. And so once all that goes and some of this other stuff. So that's 60 out of 102 that we made some pretty good progress on in 6 or 7 months. Of the 42 that are left, right now there are 4 that are unfounded or we're not going to work on because they don't work. Basically rejected the ideas for various reasons. So making very good headway on the recommendations, and we fully accept what they're saying. It makes good sense. However, I know that cops on the street, officer presence makes a difference. And there was my request to Mr. Ifland and Mr. Kukulski for 12 additional sworn officers Okay, it came down to 6. The 8 is there's 2 support personnel in there, which I will use to augment those specialized units to target the problematic areas. That was my request over and above CPSM.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
You mentioned 10 were in our council area.
Correct.
How would this public safety mill levy address all 10 of those for you?
Correct.
Great.
Yeah, they're talking about adding, for example, and going to Councilmember Ronning, putting a detective or one of our ID techs to support the DVI investigator. If I have if this goes and I get a body, I can do that. If not, then we need to get creative on what we're doing. There are several examples across the board which fall squarely in your wheelhouse. Let's talk facilities. I have no authority over new facilities. So once the decision's made one way or the other. So of the 102, there are only a handful that cost money. Everything else is tweaks. Why we do things the way we do, and all I can answer is because we've always done it that way. So we make some changes to fix some things in our CAD system. We have our director, Mr. Yeager over here, has been absolutely great to work with to get some things squared away on how we input data. That's all it was. It was a data input issue that makes us look like we're driving around doing nothing, and that's not the case. So get things like that fixed. But other than that, a handful costs money, and that's why we're here tonight. Hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ewald
Thank you, Mayor.
and Councilmember Ronning.
There's other people here, Councilman.
Everybody likes to see you standing up there.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I wouldn't want to be a police officer in this day and age in the United States. It's a tough game. In Montana, it's Billings, it's really bad because the pivotal factor in this whole public safety is the jail. Now, if I was a policeman and I was writing tickets, it would just demoralize me for the fact that I'm just writing a ticket in blank air because that's where it's going. It could even be a felony and that's where it goes, right? Some,
not all.
See? So, I mean, it's really hard to keep the morale up. And because they're defunding cops in some of these other cities, we get a little bit of an advantage because they want to come here. But I've been on this job now for 3.5 years, something like that, and I only remember one time you addressing the city council and you were just proud as can be, and I was proud because you were proud, and we had 56 or 55 patrol officers staffing patrol vehicles, and 1 month later, 3 were put on leave. So that was the only time in all this time I've been on here that you came in front of the council and says we're fully staffed. It seems like we have a hiring problem. We pay these people to go to the academy, we pay them wages, and we pay their tuition, they come back and 40% drop out in 2 weeks.
Well,
on the last bunch, right?
On the last bunch, but that was certainly an anomaly.
It happens other times too, and so it's a tough deal, and I think a big part of it is that pivotal part. We got the jail, and there's no place to put anybody. So if we put 10 more police on the street, and we write all these more tickets, we give Gina a whole bunch of work, and we give Judge Kohler a whole bunch of work, but there's no place to put them, so they're right back on the street, and so we get the same people getting the ticket next week, or maybe not even next week, maybe it's the next day. And so it's kind of counterproductive, and that can't do anything for the morale of the police that's doing that.
Council member, you're right. It is frustrating for them. That's why we're working very hard with our partners across the state. Talking with the commander of the jail, Department of Corrections has done a marvelous job getting their people out. If you recall, that's what's tying up spaces. There's 100 to 110 DOC inmates tying up space at YCDF. The director came to Billings and talked to all of the major stakeholders and said, I will get that corrected. And so far, he's held to his word. He has gotten people out of there. That frees up space. There's no shortage of criminal element here. And like the Field of Dreams, I mean, we'll fill it. We will fill it. The one thing that I would say, with all due respect, is that I don't think the reason why, I mean, I know the reason why people left had nothing to do with the fact they couldn't get people in jail. There were some personal issues and performance issues or whatever. And again, that ebbs and flows, but that's an anomaly. What I just started hearing, which is very troubling to me, I mean, people get frustrated with the catch and release program, but what I just started hearing was it's not safe because we're running with 9 people, with 10, 11, 12 people in a growing city with the violent crime we're seeing. That troubles me. And so we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide the training, the equipment, the support, and the logistics so they can go out and do what they do. Nobody signs up to, get assaulted or get shot at. And so, when I start hearing that's the concern for me. And this will help. I mean, it's not a panacea, but it will certainly help. But I hear your concerns.
Mayor, please.
Go ahead.
So if you had the full force, how many would that put per shift?
Well, a full. Are you talking about what I would like to see, or what I'm off?
You have 56 patrol, right? Or 55?
Oh, I have 80 assigned to patrol. Okay, and if everybody shows up to work, I have nobody sick, nobody taking time off, nobody in school, nobody injured, we are probably fielding 15 people per shift, not including commanders.
You probably got 2 off on vacation.
I'll have 2 off on vacation. I got somebody off. Wife's having a baby. They're on FMLA. Got some in school because we have required training. I have some that get injured, and we provide light duty for them. And, then I had a retirement, so there's a hole in the schedule right there. So we end up with those minimum numbers. But if everyone shows up, we're golden. But that's not reality.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with you, Chief St. John. Since you're there, I'll just start with you. So one of the things you said initially when you stood up is you said, we will do what we need to do. So I will share with you, and you've heard me say this now for 3.5 years, and I just really want to compliment Councilwoman Joy. We have been fighting for a public safety mill levy for 3.5 years. I personally, I'm going to support this motion. I personally don't think it's big enough. I think it needs to be a lot bigger. I think the ask is going to come a lot sooner. I wish we would go for more. But one of the things you said at the beginning is we will do what we need to do. So I'll share with you that I was one of those calls for service today, and you may have heard about this already. But I had a call for service at 12:30, and it was fairly immediate that a patrol officer needed to be, because it was where people were doing something with a vehicle. I got a call from a patrol officer a little bit after 2 o'clock. That was the earliest there was a patrol officer available to go to that call. And I had a great conversation with this patrol officer. It was his particular Friday. And he was so apologetic because he knew I was a council member calling. And I felt bad that he was apologizing to me that he couldn't get to that call earlier. He was overwhelmed with calls already at 12:30 in the afternoon on a Friday. And so when I hear we will do what we need to do, I think the public needs to understand that you absolutely are going to, but there are a lot of other elements that are involved that will maybe slow you down. And so hopefully this public safety mill levy can help address that. Just to share with you, that patrol officer, which like we learned in the CPSM study, is they are incredibly overburdened. When I asked him how he was doing, it was 12:30 in the afternoon, and he said, I'm really tired. I have been on so many calls already today. So my heart goes out to your patrol unit. It really does. And I hope we can really make some impact here. So one of the things that you supplied us information with, and I don't know if all of council saw this, but as you know, I've been working with you and city administration to get data for 10 years, because that's what we're looking at where we see this increase of crime. Some of the data that you supplied us with, and one of the reasons I asked you about the misdemeanors and felonies, is that what you shared with me is that we've seen 68% of those offenders that commit felonies had committed a misdemeanor previously. So if we'd had the resources to address those misdemeanor crimes, perhaps those felony crimes would not have happened. So I hope that this really hits home with people how necessary this public safety mill levy is. As I shared, I don't think it's big enough. I hope that we can do some good with our Citizens Police Advisory Board as well. I was thrilled in Chris's wrap-up slides. So much of what he really addressed is what we've been working on for 11 months with that Citizens Police Advisory Board to get that in place to help you with that workplace recruitment, retention, and workplace diversity and some of those other areas. But I just really want to thank you and hope that we really can get you to the point where you will do what you need to do and we get you there in a timely manner.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the comments, and I'm sorry you became one of those statistics where, you're being prioritized and you keep getting pushed down. Mr. Yeager's staff, at my request, sends me snippets from their CAD screen when we start getting a bunch of calls. I got one at 2:30 today of 14 held calls. So there's 14 of our citizens, and I didn't really look at what all the incidents were, but 14 citizens waiting for service from the police department that we had nobody to send for whatever reason. Now, a community service officer may be able to take some of that off the plate. Some of those other things, that's what the theory. But this is what I'm afraid of, is that we keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, resources stay stagnant. Pretty soon, we're going to prioritize calls. And an interesting question, and then I'll sit down, is I ask the citizens, what do you not want me to do? Not if you give me X number of dollars, I'm going to do all of this. What do you not want me to do? And then I'll list all the services that we provide. Do you not want SROs? There's 8 cops right there. Do you not want a traffic unit? There's 4 right there. Because the number one thing is to answer that 911 call that you made. We had nobody. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. So we will do what we need to do to make sure that somebody shows up when you call.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other council, council member, I want to make sure everybody's had an opportunity to either weigh in or ask questions. If you haven't already, Councilors Tricky, Boyette, Yekwich, anything from you guys before we recognize Councilmember Purington? Not. Councilmember Purington, and then I would suggest we get close to a vote. We still have one other item this evening. Councilmember Purington?
Thank you. So I would like to ask new and hired Chief Valdez. So one of the things that my understanding was from the CPSM on your portion was the tiering of calls, prioritizing, I suppose would be a different word, but that it would drive down 50% of your activity. So I just wanted you to comment on that. And my other portion was with Mr. Yeager. There was nothing in any of this that I saw funding for the call center. And I think that was part of whether it's prioritizing, making up these tiers for calls. So if you would address how it would decrease some of your activity and then the call center training or whatever that funding would be, where do we see that in this?
Sure. So as far as the priority dispatching goes, it should dramatically decrease our call volume as it states. I don't know about the 50%, but just by its very nature, it should. I can't remember if we touched on it last week or not, but there's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo type calls. And the Alpha and Bravo type calls, more than likely we would not respond to. Whatever ambulance provider we have in town would be the one that would respond to those in transport. So that's where it takes some of the load off of us. And then in response to the funding in the 911 center, I know we're looking at different options out there. A lot of research being done right now. We are having issues with maintaining staff right now. They're in negotiations. There's a lot of variables moving right now, but I can tell you we are looking at addressing a lot of these.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else from council? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just got a comment. Councilman Yakowicz and I have been pushing for public safety for 8 years now, or just about 8 years. We've had wins, we've had losses, we've had improvements, we've got it drug back, all of that, and then the pandemic, so we lost there. But, previously a lot of these discussions have all been bodies, more money for bodies. This is truly the first offer up to this council that's really a holistic solution. We're talking more than just police officers, more than just a few firemen, all of those kinds of things. So, this truly, I think, has real potential. It's not just a huge ask of $250 or whatever. We're going to get the same effect or even more effect with half the money. Even if we include the fire station, ultimately, we're still half the money. And, every one of us in our campaigns have run with public safety as our priority. Every year, public safety is the priority for this council when we go to the city administrator. Has been the whole time I've been on council. So I'm kind of at the point now, we've got a great proposal here. It's holistic, it really kind of hits everything. And I'm kind of the point, this council really needs to put up or shut up at this point. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Let's move to a vote soon. Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Dees.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I brought with me my folder, my public safety folder, and I usually take electronic copies. So this is a small fraction of the different papers that have come before council with proposals for public safety. And this isn't a representation of all of it, because it's just the paper copies that I stuck in a file at some point. This is real, and we need to move. I would second that. We need to move. I just would like to speak a little bit to the code enforcement. A lot of people don't call code enforcement. They say, I walked down the sidewalk and they didn't shovel and I was all sliding this way and that way and I never called. A lot of times people don't call. When I don't know exactly how code enforcement handles everything, but if you're called and there's more than one sidewalk that needs to be cleared, certainly if someone then says, or a property owner would then say, well, gosh, mine isn't clean, but neither is theirs and theirs and theirs. If that's an issue where we can, I don't want to use the word proactive because that seems to maybe not be a word that resonates very well. But if a code enforcement officer is standing there and all the other neighbors across the street haven't got a sidewalk cleared, I would certainly think if the reason why the code enforcement was called is because of a safety issue, why wouldn't a code enforcement officer say, gosh, if the person was walking on that side of the street, they'd be just as unsafe as on this? if this is about safety, if it's about us finding code enforcement and using it to get to issues before they take over a neighborhood, because they tend to. Well, my neighbor put his boat out there. Well, my neighbor did that. I would certainly support code enforcement going out there and saying this is an area that needs a tune-up, and us doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. There was another hand up. Was it Councilmember Deese? Councilmember Deese.
Yeah. I agree with Councilmember Brown on this. I've not been on council as long as him, but I have looked at the public safety issues. I really like this approach. It does include a lot more than just throwing money and bodies at a problem and hoping for a solution. I really appreciate all the department heads giving us a plan. Chris, thank you very much for leading them that way to bring us a plan. And I think this plan will work. I will support this. It's not everything the way I would like it, but that's okay. It's probably 80%, maybe a little more. But I will support it, and we'll put it to the vote of the people, and I think they'll support it as well. It's not too much of an ask, and it's not too little. I know some people would like more, some people may like less, but I think this is going to be really well received by the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's the mama bear size bed? Is that the point, I guess? Yeah. Okay, anything else before we move to a vote, Council? Last word, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. This just has to do with the language, and I had sent this email out. And I mean, I'm okay with substance abuse services, but SAMHSA really has very clear language where the language is substance use disorder services. I'm okay with substance abuse services, but technically, I think it's typically referred to as substance use disorder services. But just wanted to share that.
And when I looked at that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Generally with mental health and substance abuse.
We'll go ahead and move then to a vote, Council. If there's no great objection from Council. Is the motion clear? The motion is by Councilmember Yakwich for approval consistent with the staff recommendation, but the 34 mills, which is the language that was distributed this afternoon, it's all at once. There's not a second assessment or a second installment. It's just the 34 mills. So with that being the motion, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. If voting in favor, raise your hand. And voting in favor are Councilmembers Joy, Cole, Ronning, Yakwich, Triki, Neese, Boyette, Purington, Brown, and Shaw. Voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, Councilmember Ewald. Motion passes on first reading. Thank you very much. See you in a couple weeks for second reading, I guess. I'll move then to item number 6. Tony, would you read item number 6? And members of the public who came, thank you for your comments. Item number 6. Tony?
Item number 6, public hearing and resolution establishing collection, disposal, and landfill fees for FY 2022. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Our presenter tonight is Jennifer DeRay, our Deputy Director, Public Works. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This one will be much shorter than your last one, so I'll just do this for a few minutes. I think Debbie's going to share the screen for me. Okay. You can go to the next one. All right, FY22 revenues are budgeted at $17.3 million for solid waste, and expenses are $24.7 million. The revenue gap there is just utilizing the excess reserves for planned capital projects. The primary drivers for this proposed rate increases are capital investments at the landfill and inflationary increases. You've probably already are aware that right now the May Consumer Price Index was at 5%. So we are definitely seeing those increases as well. So we are recommending 2.5% increases in both residential and commercial collections. The monthly residential collection fee is at $11.53 per month, and this would increase by 29 cents to $11.82. This comes to only about $2.73 per week for both regular and yard waste pickup. The actual calculated cost of service rate for residential collection is $14.75. This means that about 80% of the residential collection fee is subsidized by the landfill. This is about $1.6 million that we are subsidizing with landfill fees. The risk that we run with these fees is that it would mean a large rate increase if we ever lose the ability to subsidize. I would not recommend subsidizing residential collections any more than 20% that these rates will result in. So we're also recommending a 6.8% increase in roll-off fee, and this is an $11 increase from $164 to $174. The resident collection rates compared to other cities is shown here. Billings is always well below all other cities when we survey the other cities. This chart really does not compare apples to apples. I'm not aware of anywhere else that provides the service level that we do in Billings, where you can put just about anything or any amount of trash out and we'll come pick it up. The pictures on this slide show what our drivers have to often deal with when they're running their routes. While the vast majority of other cities charge for all additional refuse. The business model for Billings has always been to provide the gold standard of customer service, but unfortunately this is at the expense of our efficiency. So we need to reevaluate that model, and we're looking at changing a few things in public works. We're unable to just continue the current service level with our current staffing levels, especially considering that we still have 3 positions in collections. We will be redoing all of our routes to optimize them, and are looking at decreasing how often our trucks pick up our extra trash run. Also, we've discussed this at previous meetings, but we are continuing to look at pay-as-you-throw system, and we'll bring that back to council at a later date. We cannot do that and convert to a pay-as-you-throw system until the conversion of our shared residential containers to individual gallon containers is complete. For landfill fees, we are recommending a 5.6% increase for City of Billings customers. The last 2 years, council has actually approved higher rates than staff recommended for landfill fees for the customers that are outside of City of Billings. So we are approaching this with a more deliberate approach, in which outside of Billings fees will be 50% more than Billings fees, and out-of-state fees would be 100% more. This results in a 9.9% increase for the other towns and counties outside of Billings, and a 15% increase for out-of-state customers. In the future years, just to maintain these 50% and 100% levels, outside Billings users will see the same percentage increases as the Billings users will. So in the last year, 62% of refuse has come from the City of Billings residents, 24% came from Yellowstone County, 11% comes from other counties in Montana, and only 3% comes from out of state, and it's all from Wyoming. The Billings landfill fee is currently $20.84, and this will increase by $1.16 to $22. And the outside Billings fee is at $30.02 right now, and that will increase to $33. This is a $2.98 increase. The out-of-state fee is right now at $36.11 and will increase by $5.47. Out-of-state customers also pay a 6% surcharge. So with that surcharge, they will be paying $44.07 a ton. The proposed City of Billings landfill fee is still $5 per ton less than the next lowest landfill fee in Montana. The proposed out of Billings and out of state rates above Great Falls, Kalispell, and Bozeman, but still well below Helena and the Waikiki. So we're also proposing that our miscellaneous landfill fees for City of Billings remain the same, but increase the outside fees to be at those same 50% and 100% levels above the Billings fees. Other changes are listed on this slide as well. We're proposing to increase the refuse requiring special fee by 5.5% rather than the 2.5% we're recommending for other collection fees. And we have proposed a new debris dig-out fee of $98.50. This fee for compactor, as we do have a few customers that wait so long before they call for a pickup that it takes our drivers over an hour just to dig the refuse out. So this is what that pays for. It pays for our costs for that. And then we also have a increase in the daily rental fee for drop boxes. So on the roll-off side, we increased by 6.8%. The actual cost of service rate study showed that we should increase by 7%. And so we decreased that and increased this rate here in order to try to discourage customers from keeping their boxes longer than they need them. We are proposing an increase from $3.25 per day to $5 per day. And then the last one here is the unsecured load fee. We implemented this fee 2 years ago at an introductory rate of $10. And along with that fee, customers are provided a tarp so that they can cover their loads the next time. At this point, just about everyone knows that they need to cover the loads, but some are still not doing it, or they're waiting until they're actually in the landfill and in line before they are. So litter control costs us a lot of money. We also need to try to be good neighbors to the surrounding community by the landfill. So we are proposing to double the uncovered load fee for Billings customers to $20. And with that, they would still receive that tarp. The outside fees will increase to be about 50% and 100% higher than the Billings fees. And then we also plan to post signs at the landfill, and the unsecured load fee will be charged to everyone that enters the landfill with an unsecured load, so customers won't be able to cover their load in the line anymore. So all total proposed fees will generate about $647,000 for the solid waste fund, and this is an increase of 3%, about 3.7% in overall revenues for us. So that's it. With that, we can stop sharing and turn it over to the mayor and council for questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Questions for Jennifer? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, over the past two budgets, we've asked you to add on 10% a year to the outside City of Billings, and it was supposed to stay in a special fund to do improvements at the landfill, so reduce costs to the city residents. Can you tell me how much in 2 years that has gained and what it's getting spent for?
Councilmember Ewald, I can tell you what it was through mid-May, which was when we last looked this up. I don't have a up-to-date through mid-June yet, but we right now have about $585,000 from those extra revenues. We have not used them. They're just in reserves right now for future capital projects.
Right, thank you. And follow-up, please, Mayor.
Go ahead.
And I noticed on your refuse pickup, your extra pickup, you said the consumer price index is 5% and you're only charging an increase of 5.5%. figuring travel time between these locations and everything, does that pencil, or should that be increased to at least 10% this year to actually pay for the employees and the time that it takes to run around the city and pick this up?
Councilmember Ewald, thanks for the question. I would not object to it being increased by 10%. I do think that it's a screaming deal still at a 10% increase. I think across the board, not just in public works, but across all city departments, we're all going to be hurting with the increases that are going on right now. And we're just going to try to hold on and hope that it starts to go down in a few months. But the inflation is going to be a problem for all of our rates.
So you're willing to, Mayor.
Go ahead.
You're willing to take a loss by doing this rather than increase it to 10%?
Councilmember Ewald, the 5.5% that we're increasing it. That is to cover our costs. If inflation keeps going the way it does, you're right, it will not cover the costs. It's taking a risk a little bit right now, and probably on all the rates that we brought forward, it's taking a risk that at some point, this inflation bubble that we're in will burst and we'll start going back down.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington.
Just a quick question, Jennifer, on the residential pickup. You said that you were subsidizing that through reserves. Which reserves are those?
Councilmember Purington, we're actually subsidizing the residential collection with our landfill revenues and have been for, as long as I've been in public works. So it's about 20% right now that's being subsidized with landfill fees.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Jennifer? Jennifer, if you can, I'll just ask if you can put a little flesh on the pay-as-you-go options. I know you're not proposing anything specific, but you are dangling a future plan out in front of us. What are possibilities for what that might look like to create a closer relationship between the cost that an individual pays and the amount of garbage that he or she puts out, since I assume that's the goal?
Yes, Mayor and Council, we've looked at several options so far, and there's a few different ways we can do it. We could even do it with 2 different container sizes, so that if somebody only has a bag or 2 a week, they get a smaller container and they're only paying for what they put out. The other, there's a lot of cities that do it that way. Others that only have the one size container residential pickup. But anything what they put out, that fills that container, even if the lid is up, they get charged for it. And we do have the computer system, the routing system in place to already accommodate that.
Okay, stay tuned. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Along the same lines of the pay-as-you-go, you mentioned you can't really implement that until the 300 gallons are changed out. When do you expect that to be completed?
Councilmember Neese, our plan right now is to be able to bring a pay-as-you-throw program back to you next spring, maybe late spring. So we're hoping to have them all converted in the next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Councilmember Ewald, and then I recommend Councilmember Shaw, and then we'll need to open for public hearing soon. Councilmember Ewald and Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, would it be possible to bring that back maybe before budget talks next year so we got a chance to look at it and decipher it a little bit instead of throwing it all into budget talks and then we got to do all this stuff all at the same time?
Councilmember Ewald's asking for in the March-April timeframe.
The pay-as-you-go, yeah. Yep.
We can certainly shoot for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw.
I just raised my hand to encourage us to move to public comment.
Okay. We'll do that. Then this is a public hearing, so if there's anybody in the library who would like to comment on item number 6, these proposed changes to solid waste fees, please come to the podium, give us your name, and keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. And if you're watching on Zoom, go ahead and you can do that now. Hit the your raise hand feature so that Tony knows to take you off mute. But first, is there anybody in the library who would like to comment on item number 6? Anybody in the library on item number 6? Not seeing anyone, so we'll go to online. If you're with us online, please hit that raise button, that raise your hand button, if you'd like to comment. Tony, are you seeing anybody who has used the raise hand to comment on item number 6?
We do not have any attendees at this point.
Okay, then looks like we can close the public hearing, which we've done, and back now to council. Councilmember Brown, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wanting to make sure that Mr. Olmsted knew this was item 6 that he'd asked.
Oh, I apologize. That's right. He had commented earlier. Mr. Olmsted, did you want to comment on item number 6?
I wanted to comment on the recommended motion that was by Mr. Kowalski.
On item number 6, the waste fee increase.
Oh, no, I don't need to comment on that.
Okay. All right. So public hearing is closed on item number 6. Is there a motion pertaining to this item, or Councilmember Yakler?
Yes, Your Honor, I make a motion to approve.
Okay. Motion approved, consistent with staff recommendation.
As
Second by
recommended by
Councilmember
staff.
Joy. After public hearing, yeah, we get it. So we have a motion for approval on the floor. Discussion on the motion. We did. Councilmember Joy. Second, Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to support this, but I just really wanted to thank Jennifer for sending us the PowerPoint and Councilman Ewald for requesting more information. And I guess I would just encourage City Administrator Kukulski to really consider that opportunity for City Council members to read these PowerPoints again prior to these council meetings, because it really makes a big difference. So anyway, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Other discussion, Councilmember Denise?
I will agree with Councilmember Ronnie with the PowerPoint presentation being here ahead of time. Thank you.
I will too.
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's always very helpful. Thank you. And also thank you to Councilmember Ewald for staying on the non-resident fees. We appreciate that. We saw how much money that's brought in, helped bring in. His name is now Mud anywhere outside the city of Billings, so he's in permanent lifetime quarantine here. Okay, further discussion on the motion? Don't see any, so we'll proceed to a vote. Motion again is for approval. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are all members of the City Council. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That concludes item number 6. Brings us then to public comment on non-agenda items. So if there's anything that the public would like to comment on, something that was not on our agenda, this is your opportunity. If there's anybody in the library here who would like to comment on something not on our agenda, please come forward. And also, if you're online, go ahead and use your raise hand feature so that Tony knows to take you off mute. Is there anybody in the library or online who would like to comment? Tony, do we have anybody online? I'm not seeing anybody coming to the podium here in the library.
We do not.
Okay, then our public comment on non-agenda items will close and move to council initiatives. Are there any council initiatives? Not seeing any, so council, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Appreciate your efforts.